Chapter 76. For a split second, Hellion Vivian thought that she had been seen through. But after thinking about it again, so what if she was seen through? Her beautiful phoenix eyes slightly raised, giving off a ruffian appearance. She could take advantage of this opportunity to leave the impression of a vicious hedonist in the third prince, so that in the future, when the matter of selecting concubines fell on her, that wouldn't be good. As a result, Hellion Vivian patted the mythological beast on her shoulder, and with a voice that only the two of them could hear, she lightly laughed and said, "Little White, you did well. This highness didn't do anything. This highness only borrowed her sister's slap to make her speak out her thoughts, that's all." The white cat disdainfully looked at the two humans in front of it who were locked in a fight, and disgustedly brushed its whiskers. Hellion Vivian thought that this could kill two birds with one stone, but who would have thought that when Beligaju heard those words, the playfulness in his eyes actually became heavier, so much so that even the corners of his mouth rose into a devilish arc. This made Eunuch Sun doubt whether his eyes were playing tricks on him. Otherwise, why would His Highness look at a swarthy woman in a different light? This is an illusion, it must be an illusion. And at this time, the usually innocent and pure Hellion Jiawa had already had her hair pulled by Hellion Mai. The pain from her scalp almost made Hellion Jiawa unable to control herself and want to curse. She was flustered and exasperated as she glared at Hellion Mai, knowing that there wouldn't be any results even if she continued to speak, so she simply raised the martial qi in her body, and with a bit of strength, she shook Hellion Mai a meter away. Murong Changfeng's face was ashen. He didn't understand what had happened. This Hellion Jiawa who had always followed Hellion Mai's instructions, how could she say something like this without considering the situation? He remembered that when he entered the defense division, this pair of sisters were clearly not like this. Looking at them now, it was simply as different as heaven and earth compared to that time. Could it be that this was their true nature? Murong Changfeng's body stiffened. Hellion Jiawa was a bit better, she just looked a bit more valiant than usual. That Hellion Mai was simply like a mad dog. If he allowed her to continue speaking like this, who knows what she would reveal, making him, who spoke up to protect them, lose face. Peng. Hellion Mai was heavily thrown onto the ground. The surrounding discussions entered her ears one after another. She shook her head, and only then did she gradually wake up. Recalling the words that she had just said, her expression immediately changed greatly. Her entire body was paralyzed on the ground. Why? Why did it become like this? She seemed to have been possessed by a demon just now and said all the things that she shouldn't have said. No. Hellion Mai hugged her head and shrieked involuntarily, "Who is it? Who framed me? I don't." Over. Hellion Mai's face showed despair, her throat filled with bitterness. She simply didn't dare to look at the people standing around her. What's more, there were still young masters from various families standing here. She was so barbaric just now. In the future, she was afraid that she would never be able to marry again. When Hellion Jiawa saw this, tears also gushed out. When had they sisters ever been in such a difficult situation? She didn't believe that this matter had nothing to do with Hellion Vivian. She also knew that at this kind of time, they couldn't be strong anymore, they must be soft, only then would they be able to attract other people's sympathy. Therefore, Hellion Jiawa didn't care about former enmity. She reached out and hugged Hellion Mai. Turning her head to look at Murong Changfeng, she weakly called out, "Lord, younger sister must have been under some kind of evil curse, that's why she went against her heart and said those unbearable words. Hellion Jiawa beseeches Lord, first let us sisters go down to rest." Hellion Mai going crazy like this was also good, although she also didn't want to see her own younger sister lose all standing and reputation. But this way, she would have a way out. Otherwise, Third Prince might drag her and Jing Wu Wang down together. Right now, she could take advantage of the panic to muddle through this matter. However, Hellion Vivian was never a person who would let go of a loss. She looked at Hellion Jiawa, her tone indifferent. "Second younger sister, you want to wrongly accuse me and then leave?" Hellion Jiawa's arm stiffened, her beautiful eyes turned red, as if tears were dripping down. She glanced at Hellion Vivian. Looking from afar, people who didn't know would think that she was the one who was wrongly accused. However, everyone knew that this wasn't the case. Therefore, her trick of pretending to be pitiful was completely useless. Even Murong Changfeng didn't speak up for her. Hellion Jiawa knew that this time, she had to admit defeat. Her eyes flashed with malice, her small face slightly lowered, and she faced Hellion Vivian and bowed. Her lower jaw tightened. Eldest sister, this time it's younger sister's fault. Younger sister shouldn't have wrongly accused you without investigating anything. It's good that you know your mistake. Hellion Vivian smiled. What I'm afraid of is that younger sister's heart is still unconvinced. Otherwise, why would you be so unwilling to bow? Hellion Jiawa firmly pinched her fingers, her waist bent again, and even her knees bent to the ground. However, her face still maintained a faint smile. Is older sister satisfied now? Whether I'm satisfied or not isn't important. The most important thing is younger sister. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips, pausing after each word. Are you convinced? She did it on purpose. She deliberately emphasized the last 3 words. Hellion Jiawa was so angry that her entire face was distorted, but she had no choice but to lower her head by an inch. Her lower jaw trembled as she said, convinced. After saying these 2 words, the handkerchief in Hellion Jiawa's hand was stained with a layer of blood. Making her use this kind of posture to curry favor with Hellion Vivian, it was simply more unbearable than killing her. She would rather slap her own mouth than be looked at like this. Look at her groveling while Hellion Vivian took all the glory. Not only this. This time, she even threw in her younger sister's reputation, as well as the lifeline that the Su family used to bribe the academy all year round. If grandfather knew of this matter, he would certainly fly into a rage. Also, there was third prince. How could she let that man see her in this kind of inferior position? All of this was all because of Hellion Vivian, that slut. Hellion Jiawa hated that she couldn't kill her right now, but she knew that she couldn't do that. Therefore, she could only bite her own thin lips and let those guards take Master Jing Wuwang away. She must show that little slut a bit of her power, no matter what method she use. She couldn't wait until the martial chi competition, and she couldn't wait until after the consort selection. She wanted that little slut to die now. Hellion Jiawa's eyes were floating, overflowing with a burst of poisonous intent. Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. The White Fen clan was a mythological beast that could see through human thoughts the best, not to mention that Little White was a prince. Of course, he was aware of the resentment emitted from Hellion Jiawa's body. He coldly reminded Hellion Vivian, if this king was you, this king would directly kill her. What's the point of making her apologize? What's the point of kneeling? What a waste of time. You don't understand. The most painful thing for humans is not death, but to make them lose what they rely on the most for survival, such as power, such as face. She believed that just now, Hellion Jiawa must have felt even more unbearable than death. For so many years, Hellion Vivian had always lived like this. She suffered all kinds of humiliation, and her life was worse than death. What she wanted had never been to cut off all ties with a blade. All the things that should have belonged to the Hellion family. Whatever those people took from her in the beginning, she wanted to take it back bit by bit. Chapter 77. Outside White Academy, after Su Jiacheng heard the news of Hellion Jiawa's humiliation, he and Hellion Guang Yarrow rushed over together. Grandfather, father, I really can't stand that trash anymore. Hellion Jiawa completely lost her patience. Her eyes viciously stared at the corner of the handkerchief. I want to remove her name from the Hellion clan. Su Jiacheng listened to his granddaughter's words and said, I used to think that a trash wouldn't be able to stand up to any waves. I didn't expect that she would accidentally destroy all the relationships I've worked on for so many years. Since she doesn't know what's good for her, then let her suffer. Guang Yarrow, you go and handle this matter. I reckon that the remaining ambitious people in the Hellion clan have long since stopped wanting a trash to stay in the clan and have her hands and feet tied. Hellion Guang Yarrow nodded, but as sinister as he was, he discovered a suspicious point. That vile spawn and the third prince both don't know martial chi. How in the world did they escape from such a dangerous place like Spirit Forest? Don't tell me that vile spawn is hiding something from us. What could have happened to her? Hellion Mai covered her bruised forehead and disdainfully shouted, she was just lucky to save the White Fen clan's prince and let him take her out of the forest. Otherwise, with her three-legged cat's martial arts, she would have died in Spirit Forest long ago. You pay attention to your tone and identity. Helian Guangyaro had long been angry with her. Today, in the court, because he had such a daughter, he lost all face. Now, the entire capital knew that he, Helian Guangyaro, had raised a brute. After so many years, you haven't made any progress at all. Today in the academy as well. It's fine if you lose face yourself, but you even exposed your second sister. If that brain of yours doesn't open up, father will write a letter to the headmaster to have you quit school and get married. Helian Mai felt wronged after being scolded, but she didn't dare to refute at all. Everyone knew that a girl who had been expelled from school simply wouldn't be wanted by anyone in the capital, unless she married those old men in their 70s or 80s. How could she, who had always been proud and arrogant, accept that? Just thinking about that scene made her feel disgusted. Usually, at this time, Helian Jiao would have already spoken up for her. But now, Helian Jiao actually sat to one side and calmly drank her tea. The corners of her eyes already showed annoyance towards Helian Mai's constant stupidity. However, Helian Mai did not notice it. She only wanted to persuade Helian Guangyaro to calm down. No one noticed that the thing that Wei Wei did today, the goal that she wanted to achieve the most, was already beginning to bear fruit. If you want to destroy an organization, you must first let them have internal disagreement. Even though Wei Wei didn't see this scene in the carriage, but as long as it was a normal person, they wouldn't place an unsafe factor who knew everything about them by their side. In the past, when Helian Mai and Helian Jiao lived together in the general's residence, they were not conspicuous. Now, they both came to the White Academy. All the contradictions would be highlighted bit by bit. One was at the superior compound, receiving countless adoration. Although one was not bad, her treatment was not as good as the other. Helian Mai was not a kind person. It would be strange if she was not jealous of Helian Jiao. And Helian Jiao was not aware of the danger. When she came to the overcrowded environment, she would realize that sometimes, having a sister who understood all her secrets was not a good thing. When the time comes, I don't need to do anything. They can fight each other like dogs. Helian Vivian leisurely whistled. She returned to the inferior compound in a very good mood. Too many things had happened in the past 2 days. Helian Wei Wei was finally able to relax when she finally returned to her own territory. She simply threw away her shoes and outer garment and lazily sprawled on the wooden table. She swallowed the dragon pill that she earned from Beligaju and started to cultivate her breathing. She wanted to try to wake Yuan Ming up, but found that the other's mental state showed signs of excitement. Helian Vivian realized that Yuan Ming's deep sleep might not be a bad thing. Then let him sleep. Maybe when he wakes up, there will be a pleasant surprise. Helian Vivian exerted force in her palm and absorbed the essence of the entire dragon pill into her body. In an instant, the air around her started to rotate. Even the ancient scrolls on the table started to churn incessantly, making bursts of noise. The white cat that was crouching at the side and basking in the sun straightened its body. Its eyes flashed with amazement. From the beginning, it knew that she was not simple, but it never thought that she would be a manipulative martial artist. This was not only in the Dragon War Empire. Even on the other side of the sea, it was impossible to find a second manipulative martial artist. This kind of martial artist was either a waste who did not know anything, or a shocking genius who could control all martial chi. It was very clear that its master belonged to the latter. Before, its clansmen were still questioning why it chose a well-known waste in the capital as its master. In order to help her keep the secret, he did not tell them the real reason. He only said that it was to repay a debt of gratitude and that he would return after a period of time. And the people on this side of White Academy did not even know that she already had her own divine beast. He just heard the people from the superior compound say, in the martial chi competition later, that one from the Helian family will definitely lose especially miserably. Don't even mention whether or not she can be chosen as a consort. Third Prince originally liked clean and pure girls. As for her, she already had her marriage annulled once. Basically, she already has no chance. What's more, retired emperor will not let a waste enter the family. Heh. She did not know what those famous young ladies who talked about her behind her back would think after seeing this scene. The white cat narrowed its eyes and lowered its expression. What's more, when signing the contract, it already felt that in her body, other than her original martial chi, there was also a very simple and thick aura. If it didn't guess incorrectly, that must be her contracted demon god. A contracted demon god with an ancient aura, who could it be in the end? Just as the white cat was about to open its mouth to ask Hellion Vivian, a cold and noble figure like the moon appeared at the side of the door. That man was very handsome. His black hair hung down on his white clothes, giving people a feeling of abstinence that could not be profaned. It was obviously the first time it saw this man, but it always felt that there was an indescribable feeling of familiarity. What in the world was going on? The white cat moved its whiskers and subconsciously became vigilant. Little white, be good. He is my little brother. Hellion Vivian stroked the white cat's head and lazily propped up her chin. Facing Beligaju, she raised her eyebrows. Why did you come? You don't have money to take today. The Beligaju who took off his mask for the first time felt that the White Academy's green and white clothes were not bad. It could cover up all the aura on his body. What's more, he wanted to appear in front of the world in whatever manner he wanted. For example, the current Beligaju had a trace of a demonic aura. Without any misgivings, he simply put one hand on the table and slowly pressed towards her. Chapter 78. He slowed down his tone, his words charming. I'm not here to collect money, I'm here to care about the safety of my patron. I heard that you were almost taken away by the Cat Clan as a criminal. Look, the royal family was so good at pretending. Hellion Vivian yawned, not retreating but instead patting his head. Don't worry, your big sister isn't that easy to bully. They were all beaten back by me. Is that so? Beligaju looked at her with a meaningful gaze, then casually asked, I also heard that you and the royal family were alone in the spirit forest for an entire day? Hellion Vivian made a sound of acknowledgement, then suddenly remembered something. Grabbing his sleeve, she said, if you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. Would you believe it? He was actually the one below. What? Beligaju's eyes froze. Hellion Vivian explained, that's right. Isn't there a difference between top and bottom? I really didn't expect that the imposing third prince would actually be willing to be the one below. Be the one below? Good, very good. Beligaju's bewitching thin lips had an unprecedented chill. In the future, he would let her know whether he was the one above or the one below. Surprised, right? When I first guessed it, I was also quite surprised. Hellion Vivian didn't notice his current expression. She was currently rummaging through her own things. She folded the previously washed handkerchief neatly and placed it into a small yellow box. Shadow, who was hiding outside, had already heard until his legs were about to go soft. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. He wanted to make some noise to signal Hellion Vivian to stop talking. However, Beligaju only raised his head and glanced towards the window. Shadow's 4 limbs immediately stiffened, and he silently retreated back to his original position, continuing to watch Hellion Vivian court death. Beligaju retracted his gaze and fell on Hellion Vivian's hand. His thin lips hooked up a bit. You seem to treasure this handkerchief very much. Of course it's a treasure, Hellion Vivian said in a serious tone. This is a handkerchief used by the third prince. Oh. Beligaju lowered his eyes. There was a little light in his eyes. Seeing that she cared so much about his handkerchief, he would let it go. Hellion Vivian pressed the box and muttered, I heard that the handkerchief he used is very precious. After we pack it up and sell it to the ladies of other families, we should be able to get a good price. At that time, you want to sell it? Beligaju's fingers paused, and he slowly interrupted her. Hellion Vivian didn't know if there was something wrong with her hearing, but she felt that there was a trace of displeasure in that voice. Yes, what's wrong? Beligaju's eyes were slightly cold. An ice-cold aura hit her in the face, but there wasn't the slightest trace of emotion in his voice. Nothing. It seemed that his prey still hadn't learned to be obedient. It was time to dismantle her claws. Ah, Beligaju smiled, bringing out a bewitching chill. It made Shadow tremble from head to toe, and he almost fell down from the tree. Ever since Master became acquainted with this Miss Hellion, he had become more and more fond of smiling. This really wasn't a good thing, because His Highness was a person, The more bewitching his smile, the more it represented that his mood was very good. No. Good. Does this highness look like the one below? When only Belegaju and Shadow were left, he slightly raised his thick eyebrows and asked the servant following behind him. Shadow's scalp went numb. He immediately shook his head and said in a small voice, "Your Highness, even if you were willing to lie down, no one would dare to press you down." "Is that so?" Belegaju slowly turned the ring on his finger in a circle. His delicate thin lips slowly raised. "However, since she likes this position, if this highness doesn't satisfy her when the time comes, wouldn't that be too heartless?" Ah. Shadow's back stiffened. What did he mean by "since she likes this position"? "Your Highness, the position you're talking about shouldn't be the position this subordinate is thinking of, right?" Ah. Belegaju leaned against the ancient tree. He didn't speak again. Instead, with a turn of his fingertips, a silver mask was put on his face again. It perfectly covered that absolutely beautiful face, only revealing those deep eyes and those beautifully curved thin lips. When he thought that not long later, he would be able to remove that little fox's claws and have her sit on his body, allowing him to do as he pleased, those deep eyes deepened. His slender fingertips brushed past his thin lips. The man's smile became more and more bewitching. He would personally tell her how he had to submit to others. A light breeze brushed past. In the blink of an eye, under the ancient tree, there was no longer that green and white robe like moonlight. West side of the academy. Hellion Vivian received news that she was to go down the mountain. The clan elders had an important matter to announce. At the beginning, Hellion Vivian didn't know why these people who were rarely seen in 10 years would suddenly think of her today. After she walked into the clan's hall, she understood. They were here to take revenge for Hellion Jiaoer. Ah, she wanted to see what they wanted to do with her. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and sneered. Those mocking eyes made Hellion Guang Yarrow, who was sitting on the main seat, inexplicably tremble. When he came back to his senses, he slammed the table fiercely. His face was filled with unprecedented rage. "This is your attitude. Doing things your own way. Not showing respect to your elders." Hellion Guang Yarrow's eyes were gloomy. His voice carried disgust. "If I had known that you would be this kind of disaster, I would have thrown you out without caring about the sentiments of the pass. Right now, all the elders in the clan are present. Everyone has seen what you've done at White Academy during this period of time. Hellion Wei Wei, you better remember this. It's not that I, your father, don't want to protect you, it's just that you're too much of a spoiled brat. I'm also getting old, I don't want to see that gentle younger sister of yours ruined by your hands like this." As he spoke, Hellion Guang Yarrow looked at the 4 elders sitting at the side. "Elders, I presume you've already heard about the cause and effect of this matter before you came. Because of a misunderstanding, this wicked girl made her 2 younger sisters kneel down and apologize to her. What kind of vicious thoughts is this? Just thinking about it makes this old man feel ashamed." When the 4 elders heard this, one after another, they put down the porcelain cups in their hands. One of them laughed mockingly. This old man once wanted to drive this good-for-nothing out of the clan as soon as possible, so as to avoid losing our Hellion clan's face. Look at it now, she even dares to bully Miss Jiaoer. Miss Jiaoer is someone who will participate in the martial chi competition soon. She was also personally chosen by the retired emperor as a beauty. This good-for-nothing made her suffer such a big grievance. This is simply bringing shame to our Hellion clan. Another elder took over and said, "Someone come, beat this good-for-nothing with 100 boards and throw her out of the residence. This kind of person can't be allowed to stay." Chapter 79. As the elder spoke, he wanted to stand up, but at this moment, Yuan Ming, who was hidden in Hellion Vivian's body, suddenly opened his eyes. Suddenly, with a thump, that elder inexplicably knelt on the ground. Hellion Vivian naturally sensed that Yuan Ming had awoken. The corners of her mouth slowly curved up. Looking at that stupefied elder, she said, "Nai Walin, you're an elder who was single-handedly raised by grandfather. If it weren't for grandfather, right now you're nothing more than a poor boy with no power and no influence. Now you're talking to me. Do you have the qualifications?" As she spoke, her gaze swept inch by inch across those elders who were gasping for breath because of anger. And you guys, which one of you haven't received grandfather's kindness, yet now you're allying with outsiders, for your insignificant benefits, you want to drive me out, you're really putting on a good show. The elders reached out and pressed their hands on their chests, so angry that even their fingers were trembling. Hellion Vivian's words seemed to have opened up the deepest and dirtiest shameful heart in their hearts. They indeed did receive the Defense Division's kindness. But this kind of kindness made their hearts feel stifled. Everything had to be done according to Old Man Hellion's mood. It was simply too much. That's why when Old Man Hellion passed away, they quickly stood on the new clan leader's side. Even though Hellion Guang Yarrow was acting as a substitute for the underage Hellion Vivian to manage the Hellion clan, they'd rather the clan leader always be Hellion Guang Yarrow. That way, not only could they act like tyrants, they could also completely not care about whose mood they had to look at. When they were bored, they could even use Hellion Vivian as a joke to make fun of. Who let her be a good-for-nothing? The feeling of stepping on Old Man Hellion's beloved daughter was very comfortable. Hee. Wei Wei had seen a lot of people. How could she not know what these people were thinking? She curved her thin lips and smiled faintly. Within the ridicule, there was a bit of understanding. Sometimes, people really shouldn't promote people. Who knows, maybe one day, great kindness will become enmity. Respected father, don't you agree? Enough. Hearing Hellion Vivian even mention himself, the deep sense of humiliation made Hellion Guang Yarrow want to strangle her to death. The elder who was kneeling on the ground was even more furious. Some people are really too much. Just a little bit of kindness and they want to say it every day. You even slandered our character. Patriarch, you must seek justice for us. Hellion Vivian. Hearing the elder's words, Hellion Guang Yarrow took a deep breath. If you admit your mistake now, it's still not too late. Otherwise, don't blame your father for being impolite. He thought that his words would scare Hellion Vivian into restraining herself, but nothing happened. She just looked at him with a mocking smile, and that smile made him feel inexplicably nervous. Good, you really are a tough nut to crack. Hellion Guang Yarrow was so angry that he laughed. Since it's like this, from today onwards, you can get lost. The Hellion clan doesn't want a good-for-nothing like you. When Wei Wei heard what was said, she smiled very, very slowly. This is your purpose, right? In order to avenge that beloved daughter of yours, you unexpectedly joined hands with all the elders to expel me from the clan. However, don't forget, according to the Hellion clan's rules, as long as it's a descendant of the Hellion bloodline, even if they're expelled from the clan, they can still pass through the selection process and come back again. So much so that they can control the entire clan. Hellion Guang Yarrow, you stole my family's inheritance, cut off my escape route, and thought that nobody would know. Let me tell you, one day, I will come back, kill your left arm, and break your right arm. As if she didn't hear the gasps coming from all around her, Wei Wei didn't even look at Hellion Guang Yarrow's ashen face. She flung the Hellion family's badge on the ground and casually turned around with a wicked smile. She didn't even pay attention to those stupefied elders. Bang! Hellion Guang Yarrow kicked the chair in front of him and sent it flying. He didn't seem to feel the pain in his hand, his gaze firmly fixed on Hellion Vivian's back, his lower jaw tight. A good-for-nothing actually had thoughts of controlling the entire clan, simply an idiot's dream. Elder Nai. Hellion Guang Yarrow coldly snorted and extended his hand to help the elder up. What happened just now? Elder Nai didn't care and waved his hand. Don't know what kind of despicable method that girl used, but she actually made this old man's legs go soft. It shouldn't be that she cultivated martial qi, right? After hearing Hellion Vivian's words, some people felt uneasy. Elder Nai sneered. She cultivated martial qi? That kind of good-for-nothing? You all saw it, her body didn't have the slightest fluctuation of martial qi. What martial qi could she cultivate? Besides, with Miss Jiaoer here, even if that good-for-nothing had martial qi, even if she cultivated for another few hundred years, she still wouldn't surpass Miss Jiaoer. Mentioning Hellion Jiaoer, Hellion Guang Yarrow confidently smiled. I saw Jiaoer 2 days ago. What's worth being happy about is that she advanced again. Advanced again? The elders opened their eyes wide in disbelief. It hasn't even been a year, and Miss Jiao are actually advanced again, worthy of being called a genius among geniuses. Helian Guang Yarrow modestly waved his hand. In a few days, it will be the martial chi competition. At that time, retired emperor will personally watch the competition at the Phoenix Pavilion. That's why she's so hardworking. She wants to win. After listening to these words, the elders felt that they were on the right side. Compared to that good-for-nothing, Miss Jiao had a much better future. What's more, they already received news that Miss Jiao was very likely to be the Phoenix Girl. As long as they could firmly hold on to this ship, they would definitely have a meteoric rise in the future. As for that good-for-nothing, they reckoned that she would be oppressed in the preliminary competition. She was too weak to withstand a single blow, simply a joke. However, they didn't know in the slightest that in this world, there was a kind of martial artist who, even without the slightest element of vitality, could still manipulate the wind, water, rain, and dew of the world. This kind of martial artist was hard to come by in 100 years, even more powerful than a gold-ranked martial artist. And Helian Vivian just so happened to be this kind of martial artist. Not only that, but there was also a demon hidden in her body, the invincible scourge of that year, Yuan Ming. Sooner or later, they will regret it. Yuan Ming finally returned. His momentum was even more overbearing than before, especially that move just now was really beautiful. The white cat's ears perked up as it looked at the faintly discernible figure behind Helian Vivian. Its eyes shook. It's him. Oh, I forgot to introduce you guys. Little White, this is Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming, this is Little White. Helian Vivian didn't care at all as she stretched her body, not at all like she was driven out of the house. The white cat's mouth fiercely twitched. How many times did he have to say, he was called by Zed's descendant? Yuan Ming pushed his hair back, revealing a demonic appearance. No wonder when I was sleeping, something barged in, so it was you. The white cat's face was cold, completely unwilling to talk to this demon who once had a grudge with their Bai clan. On the contrary, Helian Vivian's finger brushed across her thin lips, evilly smiling. Since everyone is here, then let's go let those stupid people bleed. Chapter 80. The sky gradually darkened, and the lanterns were lit. From afar, it was a flourishing and exquisite scene of lanterns. The crisscrossing streets were rendered very beautiful. At the corner of the street, a beggar who was originally curled up was awakened by the sound of silver hitting a bowl. As he raised his head, the evening light fell, and he saw a woman standing against the light with a white cat on her shoulder. The corners of her mouth curved into a smile. I'll give you 10 taels of silver. Take off the clothes on your body and sell them to me. There was actually such a good deal in this world. This was simply picking up a big meat pie for no reason at all. The beggar promptly got up and took off the tattered robe on his body in a few moves. The woman smiled again, and with a bend of her index finger, she flicked the 10 taels of silver into his broken bowl. Then with a hook of her hand, she put the robe on her shoulder. Her movement of putting on the clothes was particularly fast and particularly handsome. When she turned her head again, the tattered robe fell. The woman turned around and transformed into a genuine little beggar. She reached out and straightened the collar of the robe. Then with her long legs, she walked out of the dark alley. The corners of her mouth curved into a smile as she walked towards the nearby martial arts aristocratic family, the Nai family. The guard outside the door saw many beggars who came to beg. His eyes flashed with disdain as he waved his hand. Go away, go away. Stay where it's cool. This isn't a place you can come. That beggar didn't get angry, and only smiled. The breeze blew his black hair, and with a turn of his body, the wind from his leg was swift and fierce, like a knife that pierced the bone. Pang! The Nai family's door was forcibly cut open by the wind from his leg, creating a large hole. The guard at the door was thoroughly stunned. He foolishly looked at the beggar who was walking forward as if there was no one around. In the end, he loudly shouted, "Set up the formation, quickly set up the formation." Someone came to smash the place. In the capital, every martial arts aristocratic family had their own special formation. The ones who formed these formations were the death attendants that were specially provided by the family. The guard loudly shouted, and several black-clothed people flitted across the treetops. They flew and landed on the ground, surrounding Helly and Vivian in the middle of the courtyard. They were dressed in the same black robes, and their faces were filled with a thick baleful aura. Their flying kicks were like whirlwinds, and they were filled with a ferocious energy that soared to the sky. The beggar flipped to the side and used his slender palms to support himself on the ground to avoid the long legs that were coming at him. Wind swirled around his body and a lazy evil smile hung on the corner of his mouth. He was like a phantom, shuttling back and forth in the middle of the black shadows. As his long hair fluttered slightly, his fingers grabbed one of the people's ankles and pulled hard. Only a few cracking sounds were heard. The 18 shadows disrupted the array formation one by one. By the time they reacted, they were all kneeling on the ground. The guard rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Looking at the black figure hugging his leg and curling up, his heart was in turmoil. Although the Nye family's formation couldn't be considered as the capital's top formation, it was still not easy to deal with a large formation. Without martial chi above the 5th level of the wood rank, it was impossible to break this array. Could it be? This little beggar's martial chi had already reached wood rank level 5. How was that possible? Not to mention the 5th level of the wood rank, even the 5th level of the water rank would be recorded in the Imperial Palace. Because the majority of people would stop at the fire rank, it was very difficult to advance. In the Dragon War Empire, apart from those martial arts aristocratic families' heirs who could reach the water rank, ordinary people simply couldn't break through this standard. But now, in front of their eyes, there was actually a little beggar with an unclear background. What in the world was going on? Quickly go and inform the master. After the guard heard this sentence, he was just about to move. Wait. What? She left. Left? The entire Nye family's courtyard could be described as too horrible to look at. The black shadows were sprawled on the ground in disarray, their faces full of bloodstains. The beggar standing on the roof only curved her lips into a smile. Every word was clear and cold like the wind. Thank you for sparring. Thank you for sparring. Thank you for sparring. Thank you for sparring. Sparring? Elder Nye, who had rushed back from the defense department, heard the servant's report and walked to the center of the courtyard in large strides. His thick eyebrows fiercely wrinkled. The Buddhist beads in his hand also flew out and heavily fell to the ground, shattering into powder. Who is he? What is his identity? Elder Nye was truly angry. He didn't think that in this capital, there would unexpectedly be someone who dared to make a move on top of his head. Who didn't know that although his Fang family's martial arts weren't the best, they were the best of the best among the Hellion bloodlines. But today, someone unexpectedly took advantage of the time he went to the defense department to destroy his lair. That's fine. Sparring partner? His Grand Nye family was used as a sparring partner for a little thief. Investigate for me. After you find out, this old man will personally slaughter this little beggar. Elder Nye gnashed his teeth as he spoke. His eyes flashed with unprecedented viciousness. Yes. The guards bowed their heads one after another, not even looking when they spoke loudly. The Nye family's courtyard was a mess. The atmosphere was indescribably heavy. Elder Nye seemed to have thought of something. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Today's matter, if someone goes outside and gossips, be careful of your dog lives." Yes. This time, the ones who answered were the serving maids and servants. They trembled as they knelt on the ground. Clearly, they were frightened by the old man's words. They simply didn't dare to randomly look around. Nowadays, every major family had set their sights on the martial chi test that was going to be held in the near future. Ordinarily, they all trained intensely. Secretly, they all shouted with all their might. No one was willing to submit to another. If outsiders knew that the Grand Nye family of the Hellion bloodline was unexpectedly beaten by an unknown beggar to the point where they didn't have the strength to fight back, if this matter were to spread, it would certainly reduce the Nye family to a huge joke. But what Fang Shichao didn't expect was that for 3 consecutive days, it wasn't just the Nye family. Even the other 3 families also similarly suffered from an unknown beggar's sweeping. If one family was like this, then they could still conceal the secret. But if the aristocratic families of the capital all encountered the same matter, then the fire couldn't be contained in paper. The entire capital was shaken. Every family was looking for this beggar. They even took out 100,000 taels of silver to put up posters, all for the sake of obtaining her and using her for their own use. And at this time, that beggar had long since transformed into a White Academy student. She was in the middle of earning her first bucket of gold in the true meaning of the ancient times. I really didn't expect that for such a long time. I was actually discussing business with a woman. The one who spoke was the second young master of the Hay family, Hay. A typical second generation of the Northern Army, the fifth most handsome man in the capital, strong and intelligent, wearing a graceful and luxurious cloak and gown. He sat there, propping up his chin. His overbearing gaze sized up Hellion Vivian from head to toe. Then, he smiled coldly. Everyone thinks you're a hedonistic good-for-nothing, but you're actually a good martial cultivator. You even dared to use me. Hellion Vivian, you really are very daring. Chapter 81. Generally speaking, people who saw Hazy would feel fear, because the bloodthirsty aura on his body was too strong. Even the disciples of the martial arts aristocratic families didn't dare to provoke him. However, Hellion Vivian didn't have the slightest bit of cowardice. The corner of her mouth was half raised, and her voice was cold, not using, but cooperating. Young Master Hay is doing business. In the field of business, we always have to keep our partners a secret. Only then can we go far. Let's not talk about other things. Where's the money? Hazy curved his thin lips and raised his hand. The black cloth fell, and below it was a layer of silver ingots, an entire 100,000 taels. You can go look at the account book to see if it's this amount. Whoosh. Hellion Vivian lifted the black cloth, and her eyes were indifferent. Since young Master Hay said it's 100,000 taels, then it's 100,000 taels. Business is business. Hayz's fingers paused, and a trace of light flashed through his eyes. Seeing that she was about to leave, he couldn't help but ask, why didn't you tell them that you didn't rely on Grandmaster Zizun to climb up, but that you actually know how to make armaments? Hellion Vivian's footsteps paused, and her long, shapely eyebrows wrinkled. She only gave Hazy 2 words, troublesome. Hazy felt deeply sympathetic when he heard this. It was because he was rather accomplished in the field of armaments that people would continuously come to the fine compound to bother him, telling him to go to the superior compound. As it happened, he wasn't interested in how high his martial chi was. If he had so much time, he'd rather earn a bit more money. Compared to the other young masters of the aristocratic families, he enjoyed the feeling of holding the world in his hands more. That's why the Hay family had no less than 10 big and small stores in the capital. However, he never thought of relying on armaments to make money. Until recently, when he received a letter and 3 armaments, he joined an armaments shop at the foot of the mountain. The difference between this armaments shop and other shops was that they didn't do quality goods, but rather wholesale. Didn't everyone want armaments? They could provide them. However, the quality of armaments was completely determined by the amount of money. If there was a lot of money, the quality of armaments would be good. If there was less money, the quality of armaments would be comparatively worse. Even if it was like this, it was still being fought over in the market because to martial artists, being able to obtain an armament that belonged to them was simply the most important thing under the heavens. Even the students of the White Academy were inquiring about their connections, wanting to get an armament from the shop. If they were to find out that the martial cultivator that they wanted to obtain came from the hands of the trash that they were talking about, who knew what kind of expression they would have? Furthermore, he didn't even own this shop. He was just working for that trash. Eyes curled his lips and his eyes lit up. This Hellion Vivian is quite interesting. Young master, who are you talking about? The manservant who just came in with the water widened his eyes. Please don't do anything in the academy. The old man will kill me. Hazy laughed. Young master, I only want to marry a wife. Grandfather sent me to the White Academy, wasn't it to let me find a wife here? What are you afraid of, The page boy wanted to cry but had no tears. Old master said that you should find someone with a similar family background. He didn't say that you should find a good-for-nothing who was kicked out of the family. Kicked out of the family? Eyes stood up and paused. He turned his head and glanced at the page boy. Who was kicked out of the family? The page boy finished washing the handkerchief and handed it to his honorable young master. Who else could it be? Isn't it that hedonistic Hellion Vivian? The entire academy has heard that it was the 4 elders who saw that Hellion Jiawa was being bullied. They weren't happy and jointly made the decision. General Hellion wanted to protect her, but he couldn't. Ah! He eyes took the handkerchief and laughed mockingly. Truly stupid. Stupid? Who was stupid? The page boy rubbed his head in confusion. In a corner of the academy, there were few people. Hellion Vivian was sitting in her usual place, reading a book. Have the brains of those old men in the Hellion family been kicked by a donkey? Huan Ming-xiong, who was standing beside her, held a broom and fiercely swept the ground. It was obvious that he was unbearably angry. Which family wouldn't want a genius like you? They even kicked you out of the family. Did they make a mistake? They're practically as stupid as a pig. They don't want me to participate in the martial chi competition that's coming up. Hellion Vivian yawned and absent-mindedly said. That's why they used this move. Huan Ming-xiong didn't understand and wrinkled his white eyebrows. What does this have to do with you participating in the martial chi competition? You don't know the rules of the competition? Hellion Vivian was also astonished. Wasn't he an elder of 3 dynasties? Huan Ming-xiong's old face reddened. This old man hasn't cared about the competition rules for a long time. The descendants of the martial arts aristocratic families don't need to participate in the preliminaries. They can directly qualify for the finals. As for the people from other clans, they must first win the first place in the preliminaries before they can enter the finals. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she saw Huan Ming-xiong stare blankly. His mouth also opened differently from usual. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What's wrong? Cough cough. Huan Ming-xiong lightly coughed twice and began to look at the sky. This competition rules seems to have been set by this old man 10 years ago. Hellion Vivian, however, don't worry, this old man can have them change the competition rules back. Elder Huan deeply felt that he had become an accomplice. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders, the light in her eyes faintly shining. No need, I've already obtained the qualifications to be selected. Huan Ming-xiong stared blankly. Afterwards, he seemed to have thought of something. His fingers stroked his beard and the corners of his mouth curved. The little beggar that the 4 great clans have been looking for recently, is it you? Ian, I'm using it to practice. Hellion Vivian massaged her own neck. My physical fitness is too poor. Taking advantage of the time before the competition, I'll play with them a bit. Hearing this, Huan Ming-xiong suddenly laughed out loud. Good play with them a bit. Girl, since you want to improve your physical fitness, this old man will give you 2 things. As he spoke, Huan Ming-xiong's figure flashed. When he reappeared, his hands were already holding an armament and a weight buckle. This armament is this old man's new one. As for the weight buckle, it's a sharp weapon that only those top-notch students of the superior compound can possess. Not only can it hide your martial chi, when you take it off during the competition, you'll feel your body several times more relaxed than usual. I want the weight buckle. As for the armament. Hellion Vivian glanced at the armament, her expression unchanged. Elder Huan, you should take it back. Huan Ming-xiong stared blankly. This was the first time he'd seen a martial artist who didn't like armaments. Girl, don't look at this as a new armament. It's not inferior to the ones your master made. I know, it's just not suitable for me. How was she supposed to tell Elder Huan that this armament was made by her? All of its advantages and disadvantages, she was clearer than anyone else. Awkward. Huan Ming-xiong didn't expect to be rejected. He bitterly glanced at Hellion Vivian. Humph, humph. Hellion Vivian watched the old man blow on his white beard. Her heart softened. For so many days, the old man had always been by her side guiding her. Aside from her master, no one else had treated her this well. What are you looking at this old man like that for? Huan Ming-xiong proudly cast a glance at her. If you don't want it, then don't. But what if your physical fitness can't keep up? Chapter 82. Hellion Vivian slowly smiled. Elder Huan, you forgot a sentence. What? Hellion Vivian's eyes looked towards the superior compound not far away, her voice clear. In the world of martial arts, speed is invincible. Huan Ming Xiong trembled, looking at the girl standing against the light. Something in his blood seemed to have been reignited. He thought that Dragon War Empire would have a unique genius that would follow the royal family. Because right now, this genius had already begun to show her edge, preparing for a big fight. He couldn't imagine what kind of scenery the martial chi competition would be like in the near future. Dusk, east side of the superior compound. Master, you've returned. Murong Chang Feng looked at the old man who hadn't appeared for a long time sitting on the seat of honor, his eyes shining. That old man's clothes were tattered, as if he'd been to many places. He first hurriedly drank a mouthful of water, then said, "During this period of time, I've been very busy." Murong Chang Feng naturally saw it, but, is there any news about the martial cultivation genius that Master is looking for? You guessed correctly. The old man raised his head, with a white beard. Who else could it be other than the recently missing Master Tu Lao? His face carried an unprecedented excitement. I've investigated. At that time, the Phoenix building targeted the people of the capital, so that girl is definitely in the capital, not in Jiangnan or other places. This time, I've come back, and as soon as I entered the capital, I heard that the martial chi competition would be held in advance. I have a premonition. That girl will definitely appear in the martial chi competition. Murong Chang Feng didn't understand why his master would be so obsessed with a girl he'd only met once. However, he also wanted to quickly find the other person, take a good look at who she was in the end. Hellion Vivian finished reading today's book, then bid farewell to Huan Ming Xiong. When she walked to the entrance of the inferior compound, she couldn't help but stop. It wasn't because of anything else, but because a bunch of young masters and misses from the superior compound, she didn't know what kind of madness they had. Of all the places to stay, they actually came to the superior compound. Hellion Vivian shrugged, planning to go around this group of people. However, at this moment, the most indolent and luxurious man raised his eyes slightly. Bits of sunlight shone through the leaves on his body, as if there was light flowing from his body. It was the third prince. Was he seen? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and curtsied. Her posture even had a hint of roguishness. After that, she prepared to leave. Have you finished washing this prince's handkerchief? The man's voice was still very pleasant to listen to, and there was a captivating magnetism in his grace. The young ladies and young masters surrounding him looked at him in surprise, as if they had never thought that the usually cold and indifferent royal family would actually take the initiative to speak one day. However, for a moment, no one knew who he was talking to. Only Hellion Vivian paused in her steps and looked at the man with the outstanding temperament. She saw that he was holding a teacup in his hand. His 10 slender fingers were like jade, and even his fingertips seemed to emit a faint light. His eyes didn't look at her. Instead, he lightly turned the teacup, and his voice was as indifferent as snow. Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. Even when facing such a powerful third prince, she didn't show the slightest bit of panic. "I've finished washing it, but the wind was strong last night. I don't know where it was blown to." She was lying. Last night, she had sold that handkerchief to a merchant. Something that had been used by the royal family was originally a publicity stunt. However, she wasn't stupid enough to tell the owner of the handkerchief the truth. It was blown away by the wind. Beligaju pondered as he repeated this sentence. Then, the hand that was turning the teacup paused, and he ordered Eunuch Sun, who was waiting at the side, "Go get the item and let her see it." "Ari, I'll go right away." Eunuch Sun accepted the order and walked out of the pavilion. When he passed by Hellion Vivian, he gave her a meaningful look. Ever since he woke up this morning, he couldn't figure out his master's intentions. He disliked the noise, so not only did he accept the superior compound's invitation, he even moved the flower appreciation banquet that was originally scheduled at the superior compound to the inferior compound. It looked as if he was deliberately doing this for someone. Eunuch Sun shook his head. It couldn't be. He was definitely overthinking it. His Highness must have felt that the inferior compound was quiet, so he decided to come here on the spur of the moment. However, those young ladies from prestigious families didn't think so. Jealousy welled up in their hearts, and their faces were already dyed with unhappiness. Especially Helian Jiawa. She clenched the teacup in her hand, and that pair of beautiful eyes was full of malice. She sat next to the man for so long, yet she didn't hear His Highness say a single word. This slut came and unexpectedly received this kind of treatment. Wasn't it because of the handkerchief that she previously asked for from His Highness? How come she didn't know before that this slut had so many tricks up her sleeve? Before, when she stuck to Murong Changfeng, it was only when she saw a girl close to Murong Changfeng. No matter what the occasion was, she would make a fuss. She was vulgar and hedonistic, just like a commoner in the marketplace. And now, she unexpectedly used a handkerchief to make His Highness break his rules again and again. Her scheming was quite deep. Your Highness, what did you have Eunuch's son show that woman? One of the tiger generals asked delicately. Last night, Eunuch's son had come to find her, so in His Highness's heart, she was definitely different. It had to be said that a certain girl was too self-confident. If she hadn't bought a handkerchief that claimed to be used by the royal family from a merchant last night, Eunuch's son wouldn't have gone to find her. Your Highness. That tiger general still wanted to say something. Beligaju coldly interrupted her words. It's none of your business. These 4 words penetrated the ice in the bottom of her heart. That girl shrunk her feet, scared to the point that cold sweat came out. Ruo. The Helian Jiawa put her hand on the back of the girl's hand and gently patted it. She had a worried expression, but in her heart, she sneered. She was just a general's daughter, yet she had fantasies that she shouldn't have. Regardless of the occasion, she talked to His Highness. She deserved to be loathed. Liu Ranru didn't know anything. She was moved to look at the Helian Jiawa comforting her. She lightly bit her thin lips and shook her head. Helian Vivian looked at this scene as if it had nothing to do with her. The corner of her mouth pursed into a mocking smile. A group of women, for a man, played with all their thoughts. Tired. She had to say, even if that man was more honorable, what was the use? He still had to share with other women. She couldn't stand this. In her mind, as long as a woman had money on her body and makeup on her face, she wouldn't be afraid of anywhere. As for marriage, if she met someone who could be a couple for a lifetime, she would marry. If she didn't, she would be more free. She seemed to have caught the trace of indifference at the corner of her mouth. Beligaju's hand that was drinking tea paused. His beautiful eyes raised a never-before-seen chill. Chapter 83. This woman had been watching the play from beginning to end. She was watching him, Beligaju, as if he was a play. Only such a reckless little thing like this could do that. Your Highness. As soon as Eunuch's son came back, he saw Beligaju's cold expression. His heart thumped. Which blind person had provoked his master this time? Beligaju faintly hummed. His silver mask showed a chilling indifference. Let her see for herself. Yes. Eunuch's son held the wooden box and walked in front of Helian Vivian. When Helian Vivian saw the thing in the wooden box, her outstretched neck stiffened. This was the handkerchief that she sold this morning? It couldn't be. Her luck was so bad that she was caught in the act. Helian Vivian thought that her work was watertight. She even chose a shop at the foot of the mountain to carry out the transaction so that no one would know. What's wrong? Bailey Jiaoju stood up from the stone bench and unhurriedly straightened out his cuff. He looked at her from a high position. His laziness carried an ice-cold aura. It's only been a day, yet you don't recognize this handkerchief that was blown away by the wind. Helian Vivian cursed in her heart. This man was definitely doing it on purpose. What did he mean by blown away by the wind? He obviously knew that she had sold the handkerchief, so he came to find trouble with her. However, how did this man know that she had sold the handkerchief, and even caught her in the act? Could it be that this was the so-called unlucky start? She had never made this kind of mistake when she was carrying out a task before. Beligaju saw her standing there honestly, no longer prickling. She hung her head dejectedly with a tangled appearance. It was like Xiao Qi who had been scolded by her imperial grandfather. On the surface, she was respectful, but he didn't know what she was thinking in her heart. She was like a cunning little fox. First, she let you touch her head, then she extended her claws to scratch you. She was really a disobedient pet. If he didn't beat her claws, she wouldn't know her place. However, Belagaju didn't really want to polish his pet's temper. Wouldn't that be meaningless? Next time when you're washing the handkerchief, watch it carefully. Wait until there's no wind to dry it. Belagaju indifferently swept a glance at Hellion Vivian. He spoke as if he was speaking the truth. If it wasn't for Eunuch's son picking up this handkerchief, you wouldn't be able to keep that head of yours. Only she could do such a thing as to resell the item that he had given her to someone else. Eunuch's son was stunned when he heard this. Why was he the one who picked it up? It was obviously the royal family who ordered him to buy the handkerchief. Wei Wei was also puzzled at the side. She extended her hand and scratched her own head. In her heart, she was puzzled. Could it be that after she sold it, this handkerchief was really blown away by the wind? And then Eunuch's son picked it up. If that was the case, it was not surprising that she was caught. Sigh, it was all a matter of luck and aura. Who told His Highness to be a homosexual? She really couldn't compare to a homosexual. Thinking like this, Hellion Vivian felt much better. She raised her head and smiled. What His Highness said is right. Fortunately, it was picked up by Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch's son was speechless. How come he didn't remember picking up a handkerchief? How come this Hellion family's eldest daughter could lie without blushing or skipping a beat compared to His Highness? Wait a minute, did His Highness just smile? Eunuch's son rubbed his eyes with all his strength. When he wanted to look a bit more carefully, Belagaju had already recovered his usual cold and indifferent attitude. He waved his long sleeves and left. His long cape that reached his ankles fluttered in the wind. No matter how one looked at it, he looked like a deity who was the focus of attention. There was a world of difference between him and the abandoned Hellion Vivian. Third prince left. The remaining people naturally followed suit and stood up. When she passed by Hellion Vivian, the Hellion Jiawa lowered her tone. Her voice was full of malice. Hellion Vivian, I advise you to be a bit more well-behaved. Don't have any thoughts you shouldn't have. Otherwise, not only can I have people expel you from the family, I can also make you lose everything. Facing this kind of Hellion Jiawa, Hellion Vivian only smiled evilly. She didn't even lift her eyelids. The Hellion Jiawa saw this and gnashed her teeth, but didn't say anything more. Because this was in front of people, she absolutely couldn't reveal any expression that didn't conform to her image. She quickly put on a gentle smile and softly instructed, Eldest sister, although you are no longer a member of the Hellion family, we are still sisters. If you have any difficulties, you can come find me at any time. The Hellion Jiawa's words were completely meant for Belagaju to hear. Everyone knew that the royal family liked pure and magnanimous women. She said this to at least leave a good impression on His Highness. As expected. After Belagaju heard her words, he slightly raised his eyes and glanced in her direction. The Hellion Jiawa's smile became increasingly clear. Her beautiful eyes were like water as she looked up to meet his gaze. Belagaju only paused for a few seconds before he indifferently withdrew his gaze. His sleeves fluttered, bringing with them his unique and elegant fragrance. The fragrance on his body was indeed very pleasant to smell. It had the power to bewitch people. Even though she had smelled it many times in Spirit Forest, Hellion Vivian couldn't help but sigh. This was truly a man that could easily move the hearts of young girls. However, these young girls didn't include her. So when the Hellion Jiawa showed off her self-satisfaction, she didn't take her seriously at all. Hazy, who hadn't spoken a single word from beginning to end, walked over with a strong aura. When he brushed past her, the corners of his mouth slightly rose. Hellion Vivian calmly stroked the white cat on her shoulder. She looked as if she didn't recognize the second young master of the Hay family. Ah, it's getting more and more interesting. Hayz's inexplicable words made the other young masters of the noble families look at him. What's getting more and more interesting? It's nothing. Hazy walked forward without taking his eyes off her. The tyrannical smile on his face didn't fade. In front of others, they had to pretend that they didn't know each other. This was their initial agreement. Only, he didn't think that Hellion Vivian would really do it. One had to know that if it was any other girl, they would have already taken the opportunity to climb into his bed. This Hellion Vivian was completely different from the rumors. Perhaps, she was really too infatuated with that heir of the Murong family. His He family wasn't inferior to the Murong family, right? He Zi slowly narrowed his brown eyes. If it wasn't for her face being so dark that he really couldn't bear to look at it, he might have gone to the Hellion family to send a betrothal gift. Let's wait a bit more. If the old man really wanted a granddaughter-in-law, then he'd just choose her. She wasn't noisy, and she could make money. Holding her in his arms should be just right. Perhaps, he could first reveal his thoughts to his old man. Ian, it's decided. He didn't know what kind of expression the academy's students and that girl would have after hearing this news. He didn't really care about the former. As for the latter, he was very interested. Chapter 84. From then on, the news that He family's second young master wanted to marry Hellion Vivian spread throughout the entire White Academy in just one day's time. It was said that after Old Man He heard that He family's second young master had this kind of idea, he was so angry that he almost drove his most beloved grandson out of the family. How could the dignified He family's descendant marry a notorious good-for-nothing? This was simply a joke. Your Highness, you don't know, but this academy has started to stir up trouble. While Eunuch's son talked about the gossip he heard, he shook his head. You tell me, what kind of ability does that Hellion family's young lady have in the end? She's so dark and swarthy, why would young Master Zi take a fancy to her? Pa. The black chess piece fell on the chessboard with a crisp sound. Beligaju flicked his sleeves and stood up. His tall and straight back was as straight as a pine tree in Kang Mountain. His indifference made people feel no warmth at all. Eunuch's son was dumbstruck. His hand that was pouring tea froze in midair. Just now, His Highness was angry. Why? Eunuch's son started to recall what he did wrong again. Could it be that it was because he took the Superior Compound's invitation without permission? That's not right. His Highness clearly also agreed to go. Then what else was there? Eunuch's son racked his brains but still couldn't figure out the problem. Nangong Lai, who was nestled outside the academy, laughed evilly. Someone actually didn't open their eyes and touched the pet he's recently been interested in. I really want to end this quickly and go back to see what he'll do. Senior priest, who are you talking about? The minister looked puzzledly at the genius priest who was in the middle of a divination and slightly raised his eyebrows. Can it be that if we find him, we can solve this drought? Nangong Lai heavily coughed twice. Only now did he remember that he was still in the middle of a divine prophecy. He waved his hand and continued to chant. In the inferior compound's ancestral hall, Hellion Vivian was as usual. As usual, she was lying on the wooden table and fiddling with those armament components. The surrounding students all used pensive gazes to look at her, whispering and pointing. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and lifted her gaze. Only then did those people quickly stop talking. They also didn't know why, but when they met this good-for-nothing's gaze, they would subconsciously feel afraid. Hellion Vivian didn't have any other intentions. She just wanted to know what was going on with this group of people. They were unusually excited today. But before she could ask, someone came in from outside and said that the third prince wanted to use a handkerchief. The one that had been blown away by the wind should have been washed. Hellion Vivian understood that people with misophobia had a sense of ownership over their personal belongings. Therefore, this time, Hellion Vivian didn't sell the handkerchief. After earnestly washing it, she took the handkerchief and followed Ying to the superior compound. The winter bamboos were faint, the green orioles were chirping, and the fog was rising. Under the arch bridge carved from white jade, there was a pool of spring water. In this kind of weather, not only did it not emit any coldness, it was actually hot. Needless to say, there should be some kind of spring nearby. As expected, the third prince was a person who knew how to enjoy life. His Highness just entered the palace to accompany the retired emperor and drank a bit of wine. Right now, he's still resting inside. Miss Hellion should eat some pastries first. I'll go report right away. And Ying placed Hellion Vivian on a carved sandalwood chair in the outer room. Next to the chair was a small wooden table. On the wooden table were all kinds of pastries and nuts. The arrangement was very delicate and pleasing, yet there was no sign that anyone had touched them. Next to the fruit platter was a purple clay teapot. The handle of the teapot was carved with a lotus. The workmanship was very particular. Under the teapot was a small heater. The fire in the heater wasn't very big, just enough to keep the temperature of the water hot. Helene Vivian just happened to be hungry. She also didn't hold back and picked up the pastries to eat. She could even faintly hear the sound of movement inside. Let her in. That voice seemed to carry its own reverberation. Even the tone of voice was hoarse and deep, extremely sexy. Yes, Your Highness. And Ying brought Helene Vivian inside. Separated by a faintly discernible sand curtain, he outlined a clear and cold line. Come here. Beligaju seemed to be sitting on the ground. He was wearing an ancient black nightgown. Half of his clothes were open, and half of his long black curly hair hung down, messily draped on both sides of his head. This was the scene that Helene Vivian saw when she walked in. The high and mighty third prince was really sitting on the brown floor. His back was leaning against the wooden bed. His two long legs were casually bent, and his arms were resting on his knees. Even if it was a somewhat powerful posture, it still carried a bit of casual elegance when done by him. After hearing the sound, he glanced in her direction. There was a hint of alcohol in his long and narrow phoenix eyes. His thin lips opened and closed, as if he was chewing something. From the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of Helene Vivian's puzzled expression. Beligaju casually took out a piece of unopened candied melon from his robe and threw it to her. His tone was indifferent as he said, "Eat." So he was eating candied melon. But Helene Vivian looked at the thing in her palm, and then looked at the man who was tugging at his collar. She was very sure that the royal prince was most likely drunk. Otherwise, as cold and aloof as him, he would never throw the snacks that he carried with him to share with others. Bailey Jiaoju saw that she didn't eat the food he gave her. His apathetic and tranquil line of sight slowly swept over her face, as if he was trying to identify her for a moment. Then, he said in a completely unrelated manner, "Don't call me Your Highness." After a pause, he said with a trace of displeasure in his deep voice, "Everyone calls me that. Did you guys discuss it?" Helene Vivian. He was really drunk. This. His Highness when drunk was a little too cute. Helene Vivian looked at him with bad intentions. "I'll help you up first." In a while, when there was no one around, she could take off the silver mask on his face and take a good look at what he looked like. Unexpectedly, Beligaju indifferently brushed her aside. He touched his forehead, and there was a strong sense of vigilance between his eyebrows. "Go and get some water." His voice had a slight hoarseness, like the timbre that flowed out of an expensive cello, with an elegant and deep texture. As expected of the third prince. Even if he was drunk, he would not be manipulated by anyone. Even the aura of a superior that he was born with was becoming more and more obvious. He would definitely not be careless when ordering people around. Pouring a cup of water was just a matter of convenience. Helene Vivian took the cup and bent down to pass it to him. Beligaju did not take it, but just lowered his forehead with his fist. His long eyebrows were tightly knitted. His dark phoenix eyes were originally filled with a deathly stillness, but under her gaze, there was a hint of evilness. He looked at her with faint curiosity. "Who are you? Why are you so obedient?" Helene Vivian. She had been so busy, but he still didn't know who she was. Should she say that the third prince was too noble and forgetful, or should she say that he drank too much and lost consciousness? No matter what, the handkerchief had been given and the water had been poured. It was time for her to leave. But she did not expect that when Helene Vivian wanted to get up, her wrist was caught in his palm. Chapter 85. To the third prince, it wasn't a big deal. It was just a matter of adding an affair. She didn't want to be kicked out of the academy because of this kind of bullshit. Quickly pushing him away, Helene Vivian stood up from the floor and looked at Beligaju with a slightly cold gaze. What? Could it be that this highness said something wrong? Beligaju's voice had a faint smile that couldn't be ignored. Helene Vivian just realized that when he was drunk, He wasn't just a little bit more evil than before. However, after taking advantage of her, he still disdained her for being weak. He really thought that she, Hellion Vivian, was a vegetarian. If it wasn't because this body's physical strength was too weak, does your highness think that I wouldn't be able to beat you? Hellion Vivian grabbed Bellegaju's collar. Her small face was lowered and her voice was fierce. Calling her a hedonist really wasn't excessive at all. Bellegaju clearly didn't like the words she used. His long eyebrows faintly wrinkled. This little fox's mouth was really only suitable for kissing. He rubbed his forehead with a headache and said in a cold voice, "Don't worry, I'll take responsibility." What she was discussing with him wasn't the problem of taking responsibility or not, okay? Moreover, even if she really got married, she wouldn't marry someone who turned into a wolf after getting drunk. Who said that you'll take responsibility? Hellion Vivian coldly threw away the outer garment that was messed up by him. This way, she would appear more dignified. Just now, the outer garment was messed up by him. Anyone with a discerning eye would know what happened with one look. Bellegaju only thought that she was throwing a tantrum. Regardless of whether a woman was smart or not, once they had a temper, they wouldn't be rational enough. They had already kissed. Other than making him take responsibility, did she have a better way out? Even the Hay clan was properly dealt with by him after a round of drinking. Why was this woman still angry at him for something so obvious? Someone as noble as Third Prince simply didn't understand. From Wei Wei's point of view, being kissed by someone didn't necessarily mean that the other party had to take responsibility. Even though in the truest sense, her first kiss had been snatched away. Wei Wei's heart was also angry, but she wasn't a girl from ancient times. Reputation, compared to her, simply didn't count for anything. Besides, if a man likes a woman, then the first characteristic of a man should be respect for her. It was obvious that the Third Prince was more interested in her, not to mention that he had drunk wine. If it wasn't for the fact that the timing wasn't right, she would have had the urge to cripple his hands. Your Highness. When Eunuch Sun came in, he saw this scene. The two of them, one standing with fire in his eyes, the other sitting in a cold and noble manner. The way they looked at each other was a little strange. Bellegaju faintly hummed, as if he was still being tortured by the alcohol. His nasal voice was a little heavy. Eunuch Sun exclaimed, "Your Highness, why are you drinking? Don't you know that your body can't drink? Did you do something to provoke the retired emperor again?" Eunuch Sun's guess was correct. Bailey Jiaoju had indeed provoked retired emperor. It was only because Bailey Jiaoju had raised a request that made retired emperor very angry, that retired emperor, in a fit of anger, made retired emperor's imperial grandson, who he clearly knew couldn't drink, drunk, until he collapsed. Miss Weiwei. Eunuch Sun carefully looked at Hellion Vivian's expression. He leaned over and whispered, "His Highness didn't do anything to you. After he drinks, he'll always be very strange. For example, he would wickedly ask people to get out and then get in again. In short, he wasn't like his usual master at all." Hellion Vivian chuckled twice in her heart. Sure enough, it was because he was drunk. Eunuch Sun, if the royal family gets drunk again, you can finally find a man. Maybe he'll be happy and reward you with some gold, silver, and jewels. Eunuch Sun didn't understand this time. Find a man for what? His Highness only liked to make people roll around. This had never been differentiated between men and women. Because the Third Prince, Hellion Vivian raised her thin lips, each word was like a ruffian, needs to be suppressed. After throwing down these two words, Hellion Vivian left. Missing her first kiss and losing her outer garment, she looked more ruthless than ever. The Queen's aura that had been restrained by her all year round was inadvertently exposed in that instant. When Eunuch Sun heard the two words needs to be suppressed, his mouth opened wide. By the time he reacted, Hellion Vivian had already walked far away. He turned his head to look at his master. That person acted as if nothing had happened. He stood up from the floor, absent-mindedly arranged his collar, and stood by the window. He was aloof and indolent. His thin lips seemed to be broken, but it didn't diminish his elegance at all. On the contrary, it added a touch of seductive evil charm. Eunuch Sun couldn't help but wonder what his master did in the end to make that Hellion family's eldest daughter give him the 2 words needs to be suppressed. What was even stranger was that His Highness actually didn't get angry. Although His Highness' temper was better after drinking wine, that didn't mean that he didn't have a temper. What was going on today? Eunuch Sun blinked his eyes. Immediately after, he seemed to have thought of something and shouted loudly, "Your Highness, your mouth. Someone come, all of you come in. How are you all looking after His Highness?" Eunuch Sun's voice grew louder and louder. Beligaju only stood there indifferently, allowing the person beside him to serve him. When his slender finger brushed across his thin lips, it brought out a smile that had never been seen before. Eunuch Sun was still pondering how his master had provoked the retired emperor to actually let the retired emperor bear to force him to drink so much wine, to the point that his master had bitten his lip until it bled. He would never have thought that this lip wasn't bitten by Beligaju, but rather by Hellion Vivian. That was because in Eunuch Sun's memories, his master had never even looked at a girl, let alone taking the initiative to kiss someone. Even if it was really his master who kissed someone, that girl would also be wild with joy and absolutely wouldn't come up and bite His Highness. Therefore, Eunuch Sun had already guessed that the wound on Beligaju's lip was bitten by himself. It also couldn't be blamed that Eunuch Sun didn't think of Hellion Vivian. It was only because Beligaju's popularity in the Dragon War Empire was too great. Practically all of the noble young ladies wouldn't refuse this godlike existence of a man. Dusk, west side of the academy. Hellion Vivian played with the armament component in her hand and suddenly heavily wiped the corner of her lower lip. This made Ji Zun, who was sitting at the side, raise his eyebrows in astonishment. This was the first time he saw this girl so impetuous. As if she was aware of her own impetuousness, Hellion Vivian heavily closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of clarity. "Master, what did you just say? Can you say it again?" Ji Zun heavily coughed twice. "Master received news from the palace today. The consort selection is estimated to be brought forward. Originally, the retired emperor wanted to see the results after the martial chi competition, but now the palace is a bit busy. In addition, he also has a satisfactory candidate in his heart, which is your younger sister. In the evening, he will come to White Academy to confirm his future granddaughter-in-law. You are also a selected beauty, so you still have to go eat a banquet." Chapter 86. Okay. Hellion Vivian casually shrugged her shoulders. In any case, eating 1 meal is eating 2 meals is also eating. It's only a formality. The earlier it ends, the more she can concentrate on preparing for the martial chi test. Ji Zun didn't know what she was thinking. After looking at Hellion Vivian for a while, he loudly stood up, "Disciple, you can rest assured. Even if the third prince doesn't choose you, there are still other young masters at the banquet. If it really doesn't work, then the Hay family's kid is also fine. I'm not interested in getting married right now." Hellion Vivian laughed. Pushing the parts in her hands, a first-rate armament was made. This armament was clearly different from other armaments. It was made of a completely black material. When it was formed, it was only the size of a palm. However, when it was fully unfolded, it was a scythe that only the Grim Reaper in comics would carry. It was extremely cool and handsome. The blade also revealed a cold elegance, as if it was looking down on all living things. Life and death, it was completely demonic. Seeing that armament, Ji Zun's eyes lit up. "Wings of the Night God. Disciple, how much do you intend to sell this armament for? Master will give you a higher price. How about you sell it to Master?" Hellion Vivian was also very satisfied with what she made. She casually put it on her shoulder and smiled. "Master, this one won't do. It's a gift. As for the rest, Master can choose whichever one you like." "Okay." Ji Zun's expression clearly carried a trace of disappointment. However, there was no use for the wings of the night god by his side. He was already old, and simply couldn't control such a destructive armament. Rather than letting such a good treasure stay in the shop and get stained with dust, he might as well put it into the hands of a suitable person. Only, he didn't know why, but when he first saw this armament, The first thing he thought of was actually that icy brat who was currently choosing a concubine. Speaking of which, he also didn't know who exactly that red one of his was. These past few days, he observed the stars every day and night, but he still couldn't guess the reason why. Master, I'm leaving. Helion Wei's finger moved to the side. That sickle seemed to have been triggered by some mechanism and quickly closed together, lying quietly in the palm of her hand. Jizun looked at her cold back and shook his head again. If only his disciple could grow a little whiter. If she grew a little whiter, even if that ice brat was unwilling, he would still send his obedient disciple to the palace. But now, sigh. The Grandmaster heaved a long sigh. He only hoped that his dear disciple would not be maliciously belittled by those people at tonight's banquet. Before nightfall, the academy was bustling with noise. In order to welcome the arrival of the retired emperor, lanterns were hung everywhere. Even the commerce courtyard was bustling with activity. Previously, Minister Jing had already been thrown into the heavenly prison. With the return of Headmaster Tu Su Feng, the entire banquet was filled with a strong academic atmosphere. It was obvious that the latter was much more elegant than the former. Helion Vivian wasn't in a hurry to go to the banquet. As usual, she didn't dress up and asked her little brother to come out. With a lazy expression, she stood under a locust tree and yawned. When Beligaju, who had returned to his student attire, appeared, he saw this scene. After confirming that there was no smell of alcohol on his body, he walked over and said in an indifferent tone, "What's the matter that's so urgent?" "En, you've come." For a moment, Helion Vivian felt that this man's voice was too familiar. It was so familiar that she couldn't remember where she had heard it before. Bailey Jiu hummed in agreement, the demonically cold light in his eyes fell on her thin lips. This made Helion Vivian recall the kiss that happened this evening at the third prince's place. She clearly knew that this matter wouldn't be known by anyone, but Helion Vivian inexplicably felt somewhat guilty. She avoided his gaze, took out a black bracelet from her bag, and threw it to him. "Try it. It's the armament I promised to make for you." When Beligaju saw that armament, his eyes faintly flashed with a ray of light. Only, that ray of light was hidden too deep, so deep that only he knew. "Such a small thing, do I have to buckle it on my wrist?" The man pretended to be puzzled as he asked. Helion Vivian smiled, pressed the small button on its left side. Beligaju cooperated and did as he was told. A black sickle as tall as a person appeared in the boundless moonlight. "This is..." Beligaju raised his eyebrows. Helion Vivian curved her thin lips. "Wings of the night god. The first time I saw you, I wanted to make this kind of sickle. Don't look at how this armament isn't made of silver. Its material isn't bad at all. Xiaobai dug up some tungsten iron from the spirit forest for me. I heard that it has more soul-sucking power than silver. You really want to give it to me?" Beligaju's voice faintly interrupted her words. Helion Vivian raised her beautiful phoenix eyes. "What? You don't like it?" "No, I like it very much." The man's deep eyes motionlessly looked at her. Suddenly, he raised his arm and lifted her bangs. Then, he leaned over and pressed his thin lips on her forehead. The corners of his mouth carried an evil aura. "Thank you for the gift." Helion Vivian touched her forehead and pushed him away. "What are you doing? Don't you know the Academy's rules?" Last time, he was in the limelight in the ancestral hall, but he didn't do anything substantial. This time, he played a bit too big. Bailey Jiu lazily curved his lips. He put away the scythe and looped it around his wrist. "I've already said that I'm thanking you for your reward. Or is it that Sir Patron prefers a deeper feeling? For example, beating you up?" Helion Vivian also laughed. Her left hand rotated her wrist, looking like a demon. Beligaju reached out and rapped her fist. He opened his thin lips as if he wanted to say something. At this time, a burst of laughter suddenly came from the distance. "What did I say? Some people are used to being debauched and can't live without a man." It was Helion Mai. Following behind her were young ladies from prestigious families who were about to attend the banquet. All of them had dressed up meticulously, especially Helion Jiao. She wore a pure white long skirt embroidered with gold and silver velvet flowers. On the outside, she wore a light pink outer garment. In between her eyebrows, there was an exquisite hibiscus flower, adding a trace of a girl's delicate and shy beauty. Don't worry about her. She's only worthy of finding someone from the inferior compound. Little sister Nai is right. Let's not worry about her. Let's talk about something happy. Did you hear? There's news from the palace. It's said that this time, the retired emperor is not only coming to pick a consort for the royal family, but also to hold a flower appreciation festival. Every family's young master will participate. Whoever they like will be given the white cherry blossoms in their hands. A certain person will be miserable. When the time comes, they won't be able to receive a single one. That's not enough to lose face. The ridicule grew more and more. There were even people who didn't hide their laughter and said, "Then wouldn't there be a good play to watch tonight?" I still remember last year's Flower Appreciation Festival. A certain person gave us a unique joke, "Hey." Chapter 87. If they didn't mention it, Hellion Vivian would have almost forgotten what she had encountered at the Flower Appreciation Festival. In the Dragon War Empire, the annual Flower Appreciation Festival was the most anticipated festival for young girls. Because on this day, all the young masters from influential families would hold a white cherry blossom and give it to the young girl they admired. At that time, Hellion Vivian had just reached marriageable age and had the fantasies that all young girls would have. She hoped that her future husband would give her a white cherry blossom. In order to be more beautiful on that day, she even threw away her self-esteem and took the initiative to ask for money from Madame Sue. She still remembered the sarcastic remarks of those people around Madame Sue. They said, "No matter how well you dress, you're still just a poor and pedantic person." Hellion Vivian clenched her hands. She had no choice but to swallow the anger in her heart. No matter how hedonistic the rumors made her out to be in the capital, only she knew that she had to look at other people's faces in the manner. She was afraid that Murong Changfeng would forget to bring a white cherry blossom, so she called out the servant by his side and asked him to deliver a letter to her. Who knew that not only did the servant not deliver it, he even ordered someone to read the letter out loud. All the young masters and young ladies from influential families who attended the Flower Appreciation Festival all knew the contents of the letter. The originally bashful young girl's thoughts were exposed in front of everyone's eyes. The men looked at her with disrespect and licentiousness in their eyes. The young girls held their fans and laughed together. She still remembered Hellion Jiao's smiling eyes at that time. She curved her red lips and said to her, "Eldest sister, you must not bear grudges against Lord Murong. He also didn't think that he would attract so many people to watch." At that time, she was young and couldn't think straight. It was obvious that someone had tampered with it, causing her reputation to be tarnished. And at that time, Murong Changfeng didn't say anything. He only stood there and coldly smiled. It was as if he felt disgusted just by looking at her. Hellion Vivian just stood there and watched everything in a daze. Everyone roared with laughter and mocked her as if they were looking at a clown. But at that time, it was as if her eyes only had the letter pasted on the wall and the white cherry blossom on the ground. That day, she was the only girl who didn't receive a single white cherry blossom. Even Miss Mai, who was 3 times fatter than her, had a gentleman give her one. She, on the other hand, was being patronized. However, that family's young master actually said to her, TSK, I really didn't expect you to be so unrestrained. Do you want to follow this big brother, Hellion Vivian was furious. She threw the white cherry blossom at his face and ran out of the banquet. She could faintly hear that person's voice, "It is your fortune that I fancy you. You are not willing. What are you? You are just a sex slave. How dare you be so picky?" They were all saying that she was a spoiled brat with no upbringing. She even hit people in such an occasion. She's simply bringing shame to us women. But he didn't ask her why she hit him. Even Murong Changfeng, upon seeing the tear stains on her face, turned his eyes away as if it had nothing to do with him, as if she had nothing to do with him. It turned out that this group of people also did this kind of thing to her. Hellion Wei withdrew from her memories and set her sight on Hellion Jiao's body. The light in her eyes chilled. She didn't know why, but the current Hellion Jiao was actually a little afraid of this good-for-nothing smile from time to time. She evaded her gaze and her soft shoulders shrunk back, as if she was attacked and wanted to seek help. Miss Nai, who was standing by her side, naturally put her arm around her shoulder. Sister Jiao, don't be afraid. With us here, this person can't harm you. That's right. Everyone echoed one after another. Sister Jiao, in a moment, the retired emperor will arrive. You should concentrate on the banquet. The imperial family will certainly give you a white cherry blossom. As for the others, it's better if we don't see them and don't worry about them. Helian Jiao made a small sound of agreement and smiled gently. Her long skirt swayed as she arrogantly glanced at Helian Vivian. Like the moon surrounded by stars, she walked towards the superior compound. Helian Vivian curved her thin lips, tainted with a faint evil aura. She turned her head towards Beligaju and said, "Take the things properly. If you don't like them, come find me at any time to make adjustments. I should also go freeload on food and drink. Bye." The dusk grew thicker and a cool breeze brushed past. Beligaju looked at that slender and free figure, his eyes slightly sunk. Freeload on food and drink. At his consort selection banquet, the only thing she thought of was to freeload on food and drink. Master, just now, that woman gave you an armament. As early as when Helian Vivian gave the item to Beligaju, the Fire Chelene seemed to have felt something and immediately used the conveyor belt to transport himself over from Spirit Forest. However, he was hidden in the darkness and didn't say anything. Beligaju knew what he wanted to say. His tone was indifferent, attack power level 10 or above, soul-absorbing power as high as 100%. I'm afraid it would be difficult to find a second one in this world. The Fire Chelene's mouth twitched twice. Since you already know, why were you still pretending? What thanking his patron for his reward? His entire beast body was charred on the outside and tender on the inside. In a moment, I'm going to choose a consort. You don't need to follow. It'll be troublesome if someone sees you. Bailey Jiao unhurriedly issued the order. He took 2 steps forward and said in a low voice, "Shadow. This subordinate is here." Shadow flashed and respectfully knelt on the ground. Beligaju's voice was indifferent. What happened at last year's flower appreciation banquet? Shadow was stunned. Didn't His Highness never care about this kind of thing? Every year at the flower appreciation banquet, he would sleep through it. Don't even talk about giving people white cherry blossoms. When he arrived at the banquet, he would sit high and mighty on the chaise lounge, not even bothering to open his eyes. He wasn't like the high priest who liked to run into the crowd to join in on the fun. However, since Beligaju asked, he still dutifully told him what he had seen and heard. It was inevitable that he would mention Helian Vivian. The more Beligaju listened, the colder his eyes became. Unfortunately, the Fire Chelene still recklessly sighed from the side. No wonder that woman would reject Master in the Spirit Forest. It turns out that she already had someone in her heart. It sounds like she's really infatuated. Beligaju's footsteps paused. He looked back at the Fire Chelene deeply. The smile at the corner of his mouth was extremely cold. The Fire Chelene felt the top of its head go numb. It dejectedly dodged and immediately threw out the teleportation belt, disappearing into the thick fog. It had a kind of misconception that if it stayed any longer, its master would not be able to hold back and personally roast it, eating it like a roasted Chelene. It was night, and the willows were caressing their faces. On the 5th day of the 4th lunar month, the Grand White Lake could be said to be filled with fragrance. The noble ladies of each family were dressed even more exquisitely than in previous years. The ladies sat on the ground, sipping tea and admiring the flowers. Where was the vigor they had when they were mocking Helian Vivian? All of them were much more demure and gentle. They held round fans in their hands. From time to time, they would glance at the group of noble young masters in the pavilion. Their faces were flushed red. Chapter 88. The most eye-catching were naturally the Helian Jiaos group. The Nai family's young miss, Helian Mai, and the others just now were all girls envied by everyone in the capital. Not only were their martial chi more powerful than others, even their appearances were top-notch. Each of them had more or less white cherry blossoms behind them. The white cherry blossoms behind the Hellion Jower were pushed into a pile. Carefully counting, there were more than a dozen blossoms. She didn't look at them the entire time. Instead, she fanned herself with a gentle smile, without the slightest intention of picking them up. Everyone was waiting for the white cherry blossoms in the hands of those noble young masters to go, especially the one in Belegaju's hands. Although the royal family would attend the Flower Appreciation Festival every year, he had never shown his face, let alone give the white cherry blossoms to anyone. This time was different. Since he came, it meant that there was already a girl to give the white cherry blossoms to. But everyone carefully thought about it again. Even if the royal family were to give it, it would be to the Hellion Jower. They didn't have any hope, so they used words to make the Hellion Jower laugh. The Hellion Jower once again raised her head and glanced at that handsome and noble man. Her eyelashes slightly drooped, and she tenderly said, so loud, "Be careful that no one comes." Oh. So Sister Jower was afraid that no one would come. The Nye family's young miss ambiguously touched her, using the fan to cover the corner of her mouth. Did you hear that? Sister Jower told you to be a bit quieter. What will you do if the royal family doesn't come? The Hellion Jower's face reddened. You're the only one who thinks too much. Sister Jower, no matter how much I think, I can't compare to a certain someone. The Nye family's young miss pointedly glanced at the nearby Hellion Vivian from the corner of her eyes. Her eyes carried ridicule. She's been eating since just now. Don't tell me that she wants to use this method to attract His Highness's attention again like last time. The rare Hellion Jower didn't answer. Instead, she took the teacup and took a sip. Her eyes were filled with a poisonous look that no one could see through. Hellion Vivian didn't eat all the time. She played with the armament components in her hands, thinking about opening a second branch. But she didn't expect that Murong Chang Feng would walk towards her with a letter in his hand. Hellion Vivian looked up indifferently. Murong Chang Feng was wearing an embroidered jade gown, with black eyes and black hair, as if he had given her a great grace. His voice was neither warm nor hot as he opened his mouth. I've seen the letter, as expected. What do you mean, as expected? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in amusement. This person must be crazy. The two people, one with her eyes down and the other with her head up, unexpectedly had some lingering flavor from afar. Standing in the pavilion, Belegaju's hand that was holding the teacup paused. His pair of eyes seemed to be bottomless abyss. Not a single strand of abstinence was displayed vividly on his body. His body had a kind of languid and decadent cold temperament, like snow that had been covered in dust for a long time. All the young masters and young misses also saw this scene. Hellion Mai covered her face. Her eyebrows carried a smile. Here she comes again. I wonder what she wrote in that letter this year. Who else could it be? It's nothing more than some thick-skinned words. The young misses held round fans and laughed softly. Among them, there was no lack of ridicule. At this time, the Hellion Jower also stood up. She glanced at Belegaju, who wasn't far away, and softly said, Don't say that. Big sister also sincerely likes Lord Murong. It's just that the method is a bit too bold. Belegaju was still sitting in the same place. The cold wind hit his body and his fingers were a bit cold. Eunuch Sun, who had been waiting by his side, also began to nag. Originally, I thought that the matter of the letter being given at the Flower Appreciation Banquet was a false rumor. I didn't expect it to be true. This Hellion Vivian is really willing to do anything for Lord Murong. Perhaps Lord Murong will be moved and will really take back the letter of divorce. Belegaju didn't speak. He seemed to be indifferent. One of his hands loosened his collar and the other hand lazily hung by his side. His eyes overflowed with a trace of coldness like splashed ink. It looked like he was smiling. But those who were familiar with him knew that he wasn't smiling. Instead, third brother, little bald-head seventh prince, who understood him, cutely raised his head from the pile of meat buns. What happened to third brother? Why was he suddenly so angry? He had only obediently eaten a meat bun because third brother said that if he continued to eat, he wouldn't be able to become a handsome man. He would only become a big fatty. Hellion Jower also observed Belegaju's expression. Her eyes were half closed and a trace of deep satisfaction flashed through her eyes. After this incident, That slut's image in the eyes of the royal family definitely wouldn't have any. She knew better than anyone how much this man loathed women who didn't know how to behave, let alone take the initiative to send a letter at the flower appreciation banquet. Didn't that little slut always want to attract the attention of the royal family? Then she would let her get what she wanted. She wanted to see how that little slut would clean up this mess. Lord Murong, are you really going to forgive this woman? At this time, a rascally-looking young master walked over and looked ambiguously at Hellion Vivian. She's even more licentious than you think. You don't know what happened last year. When she saw that you didn't give her any cherry blossoms, she directly stuck to this young master. This young master thought that she was ugly and said a few words to her. But she was good and threw a punch at me. She's so thick-skinned that she can be. Bang! Before that person could finish speaking, Hellion Vivian had already made her move. She just stood there with a smile on her face and asked like a demon, "Does it hurt a lot?" You. That person didn't expect her to be so bold. He covered his face and tried to stand up. Bang! Another fierce punch. Hellion Vivian's fingers grabbed his collar and her red phoenix eyes slightly raised. Come, repeat what you just said. If you say anything wrong, my fist won't be happy. As if he was frightened by Hellion Vivian's aura, that person kept retreating, trying to escape her control. But his legs seemed to be filled with lead. He couldn't move no matter how hard he tried. What was going on? He couldn't use his own martial chi. Hellion Vivian was still smiling. Say it, Bang. The third punch landed firmly on that person's abdomen. That person spat out a mouthful of blood and his face turned green. He was in so much pain that he shouted, someone come. Someone wants to kill me. Hellion Vivian. Hellion Mai was the first to speak. But Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and intimidated her. Hellion Mai, you shut up. I'm telling you, whoever stops me from beating this bastard, I'll drink their blood and take their life. Hellion Mai's limbs suddenly stiffened. Here it comes again. She seemed to see the silver hair hanging behind that slut again. What was that? Was it a ghost? Say it. Hellion Vivian leaned over and locked her fingers on that person's wrist. She smiled evilly and exerted force. Chapter 89. However, in an instant, that person's screams penetrated the entire academy. I'll talk. He was in so much pain that his face turned white, and his body went limp. That day, you didn't stick close to me. It was. That person looked around, still hoping that someone could help him. But he underestimated Hellion Vivian's ruthlessness. He even underestimated Beligaju's presence. The royal glanced over, and those who wanted to help could only obediently retreat. That person had no other choice, and heavily closed his eyes. I wanted to take advantage of you, so you beat me. Hearing this, everyone was in an uproar. Looking at Hellion Vivian, the light in their eyes was different from before. Even Murong Chang Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of astonishment. He actually didn't know that the situation that day would be like this. Inexplicably, his heart softened. She had suffered so much because of him. Should he follow her wishes and give her a white cherry blossom? Murong Chang Feng thought of this, and just as he opened his mouth to call, Vivian. Hellion Vivian suddenly smiled, and coldly interrupted him. Lord, the letter in your hand wasn't written by me. In the future, before you talk to people, you should first make sure who you're looking for. If there's nothing else, please move aside. You're really affecting my appetite by standing here. Every time she saw this scum's face, she felt disgusted. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she pushed that person to the side, not even looking at Murong Chang Feng's handsome face that instantly turned ashen. Hellion Vivian, you wait for this young master. That person was battered and exhausted, spitting out ruthless words, step by step retreated. No matter how you looked at it, it was comical. Hellion Jiaoer didn't think that her carefully arranged scheme would have such a result. She even specially had someone copy Hellion Vivian's handwriting, but after being beaten by her, it didn't come in handy at all. Instead, that little bitch even clarified what happened last year. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her teeth so hard that it hurt. She thought that no matter how Hellion Vivian changed, her feelings for Murong Chang Feng would never change. After all, no matter what happened in the past, as long as it involved Murong Changfeng, that little slut could endure it. But now, if it wasn't for the fact that her face was still the same as before, Helian Jiaowa would have suspected that Helian Vivian was a completely different person. This Helian family's young lady is really ruthless when she hits people. Eunuch's son patted his own chest. My heart is trembling along with her. Beligaju faintly hummed in acknowledgement. Looking at the ruthless and ruffian figure not far away, a trace of a smile seemed to flash across his eyes. Eunuch's son blinked. Was it his imagination? Why did he feel that his master's mood seemed to be better than before? Helian Vivian, don't regret it. On the other side, it seemed like a long time had passed before Murong Changfeng found his own voice. He fiercely waved his sleeves. Because of his excessive anger, his jawline was taut. That pair of deep eyes seemed to have been cut open, unexpectedly bringing out a sense of loss. He probably didn't expect that she really didn't like him anymore. He always thought that her behavior during this period of time was merely to play hard to get. But after listening to her words today, Murong Changfeng realized that she was mocking him. In the past, it was clear that wherever he went, that pair of eyes filled with adoration would follow. Now that it was gone, Murong Changfeng not only didn't relax like he imagined, but instead felt that there was a large stone pressing down on his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. Some of the aristocratic family's young misses who adored Murong Changfeng couldn't bear to watch anymore. They said sourly, "Who does she think she is? She's just a waste." Whether that letter was written by her or not, let's not talk about it. Lord also received the letter before walking over. Otherwise, Lord wouldn't even look at her. She's still so self-righteous, really enough. Who says she isn't? You see her appearance just now. She really lives up to the words hedonistic and vicious. You all just wait and see, there won't be any young master who will give her a white cherry blossom. Helian Vivian didn't feel like paying attention to these words. She sat in her original position and continued to eat, waiting for the retired emperor to start eating. Hazy looked at her appearance, his thin lips hooked up. What to do? It seemed that the more he looked at her, the more to his liking. Only, that face. Hazy wrinkled his thick eyebrows. He still had to think about it. Alas, recently there were too many troublesome matters. He also didn't know who found him unpleasing to the eye and tipped off his old man. Now, no matter where he went, he was being watched. Even if he wanted to give the white cherry blossom to that woman, he couldn't reach out his hand. As if he saw through Hazy's thoughts, the eyes of Bailey Jiaoju, who was sitting beside him, deepened. Like a trace of ripples in a deep and serene ancient well, they quickly disappeared into the night. Just at this time, a burst of noise came from the courtyard. The retired emperor has arrived. The empress has arrived. A resounding voice cut through the sky. Helian Vivian looked from afar and only saw a golden color. The retired emperor's cloak fluttered in the wind. He had the wisdom and grandeur that ordinary old people didn't have. He was in a high position all year round, making him look a lot taller. Even that face had sharp edges. It was enough to see that when he was young, he was also a first-class handsome man. Following behind him was the current Empress Murong Changfeng's little aunt. It was said that when she entered the palace that year, the previous empress died. Only then was she promoted to the position of empress. Of course, no one knew what the exact situation was. However, Helian Vivian felt that no one with the surname Murong was a good person. Don't ask her why, she just wanted to be capricious and judge people by their surname. Furthermore, this empress was not the third prince's birth mother. In short, the matters in the harem were extremely chaotic. Even if the palace maids were not allowed to discuss it, there would still be news that leaked out. Therefore, all of this was no longer a secret. Seeing them come in, everyone shouted, "Long live, long live, long live." The atmosphere of the flower-admiring banquet was instantly ignited. The retired emperor sat down with a chuckle and raised his hand in an amiable manner. "All rise. This is not the imperial palace, so there's no need to be overly courteous." "Yes." The young ladies of the aristocratic families all responded delicately, standing obediently to the side. The retired emperor looked at this scene and nodded in satisfaction. Then, his gaze fell on that icy fellow who had an indifferent expression from beginning to end. He blew on his beard in anger. Tu Su Feng, who was standing beside him, naturally knew what the retired emperor was thinking. He gently and elegantly reminded from the side. Look, shouldn't we let them continue to give flowers? This official just took a look. Many of the young master's white cherry blossoms were not given out. Continue, of course, continue. The retired emperor straightened his expression and said to Beligaju, Laro-san, you also choose one. In an instant, everyone's gaze focused on Beligaju. After all, every year, the imperial family had never given anyone a white cherry blossom. Now that the retired emperor had requested it, he had no choice but to give one out. In other words, this was the result of the imperial consort selection. As if she had anticipated that he would choose her, Helian Jiao's pair of eyes were brimming with tears as her cheeks were stained with a light red color. Chapter 90. Helian Vivian had an indifferent expression on her face. After all, the third prince would choose anyone but her, Helian Vivian. Her. Stand up. Phew, so she was in his way. She had thought that the third prince's brain was not working properly. Helian Vivian was very self-aware. She knew that if he wanted to choose the Helian Jiao, he would have to go through her. She stood up from her seat with a piece of pastry in her mouth. Her eyes were still bright and clear. She looked a little like a silly fox and was about to make way for him. For you. The white cherry blossom in front of her eyes was more low-key than any of the other blooming flowers. However, it faintly revealed a sense of luxury and nobility. It was probably because the person holding it was too otherworldly. Even an ordinary white cherry blossom could make people think of elegance. Helian Vivian was stunned. Wait a minute. Dear, she must have opened the gun in the wrong way. She was clearly just here to go through the motions. Why did the third prince give her this flower? Could it be that he was going in the wrong direction? Helian Vivian tried to move her position. The man's deep and narrow eyes under the silver mask darkened. Eunuch Sun became anxious again and directly pushed her. Helian Vivian looked up and met the man's indifferent lips. Damn. Was it really for her? What the hell? What happened to going through the motions? Cough. Because she wanted to say something but couldn't, Helian Vivian directly choked on the Osmanthus cake in her mouth. She could clearly see the man's incomparably cold gaze when he saw her in such a sorry state. What did the third prince mean? Did he dislike her? He disliked her and even gave her a flower. Laro-san, the Emperor Emeritus's expression completely changed when Beligaju stopped in front of Helian Vivian. Beligaju didn't change. He leisurely brushed off the non-existent dust on his body and said in an indifferent tone, if you have to choose one, then choose her. What? Everyone couldn't help but cry out in surprise. They looked at Helian Wei with eyes full of astonishment, and even a bit of anger. Helian Jiao's small face paled even more. The pearls in her hair seemed to have sensed her master's shame and anger, and swayed back and forth. Compared to not daring to believe it, it was more of a loss of face. Why? That slut is just a piece of trash whose engagement was broken off. How could the royal choose her so casually? What's more, she was so dark. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. What did he mean by if I have to choose one, I'll choose her? This was a major event related to marriage. How could he use such a casual attitude? Perhaps he really didn't care who he chose, but he shouldn't drag her into it. She, Helian Vivian, had always disdained to be an accessory. The Empress looked at this scene and her eyes flashed. She said, Old Third, you and this Miss Helian still don't understand each other. Giving her a flower is fine, but that doesn't mean that whoever is given the flower will be chosen. Just now, you misunderstood your imperial grandfather's meaning. As she said this, the Empress turned her head and her gaze fell on Helian Vivian. Her delicate eyebrows wrinkled. Wei, you've been broken off your engagement by my Murong manner, yet you don't understand the rules at all. The third prince only casually gave you a flower. Is there a need for you to be at a loss like this? It's easy for others to misunderstand. Helian Vivian chuckled twice in her heart. This woman planned to push all the blame onto her so that the third prince could choose someone else. However, this time, she was very willing to cooperate with the other. Her thin lips curved. What the Empress says is right. Empress Murong didn't know when this Hellion Vivian was so good at reading people's expressions. She smiled. Presumably, until now, Miss Murong still doesn't have an ounce of martial chi on her. I don't. After Hellion Vivian finished answering, she added another sentence with a slight smile. Moreover, I'm still in the inferior compound right now. Whether or not I can pass the test is still unknown. She'll definitely pass the test. Not only the test, she'll even take first place in the armament competition. However, at this moment, she actually didn't mind telling a small lie. Empress Murong seemed to have anticipated that she would say this. The complacency at the corners of her mouth became even more obvious. She knew Hellion Vivian's weight better than anyone else in her heart. Her voice also contained some hidden joy. From this, it can be seen that you're still a bit lacking when it comes to matching old third. Ari, that's right. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She seemed to be very vexed, yet there wasn't a bit of disappointment. Instead, the smile in her eyes became even more profound. Where was the disappointment of being belittled on her face? There was only faint ridicule. Beligaju lifted his eyes. When he caught a glimpse of her light smile, his long and narrow peach blossom eyes seemed to quickly conceal a trace of anger. Then shouldn't you return the flower in your hand to the imperial family? When the Empress finished speaking, she actually felt a bit surprised. This girl was actually so cooperative with her. This time, Hellion Vivian's answer was even faster. Her voice spread throughout the entire courtyard. Of course. These two words were crystal clear. After she finished speaking, she delivered the white cherry blossom to Beligaju's hand. She looked at the Empress with even more ridicule in her eyes. It was obvious that they looked down on her. It was also obvious that they felt that she wasn't a good match for their precious son. What they wanted had never been a woman. Rather, they wanted the military power that this woman represented. The person who held the military power was the daughter-in-law they wanted. As for her, to them, she was nothing more than a good-for-nothing who had her engagement broken off. The reason why she was so cooperative with the Empress was because she didn't want to marry. She had never thought about marrying anyone. Even if she wanted to marry, she would definitely not marry someone like Beligaju. It wasn't that he wasn't good. On the contrary, he was handsome, calm, and could distinguish right from wrong. He was indeed a good man. But because he was too outstanding, he was very likely to inherit the throne in the future. At that time, the harem would be filled with 3,000 people scheming against each other. She didn't want to share a man with other women. She even wanted to break her head and bleed for this man. She wasn't willing to do that kind of thing. Moreover, what she wanted was absolute loyalty. Getting someone who loved her, and cherished her was more important than any glory, splendor, and wealth. In this life, she didn't ask for much. She only asked for one person, to never leave each other's side. It was obvious that Beligaju wasn't suitable for her, a person who didn't have her in his heart. No matter how perfect he was, she didn't care. The retired emperor, who was sitting on the seat of honor, didn't speak. No one knew what he was thinking. Hellion Jiao actually breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time that she loathed Wei Wei, she was secretly delighted in her heart. At least this good-for-nothing was tactful. Bailey Jiaoju, as the other person at that time, did not say a word. The silver mask perfectly drowned all his emotions in that pair of deep and slightly restrained phoenix eyes. He looked at the white cherry blossoms that were approaching him. Under his long sleeves, his fingers were slightly stiff, as if he was silently enduring something. Chapter 91. Old Third, Miss Hellion has already extended her hand. You should take the flowers. After all, gifting cherry blossoms is not a small matter. Empress Murong looked at Beligaju, her tone carried discussion. Fortunately, Wei Wei is a sensible child. She knows that you have never participated in the Flower Appreciation Festival and don't know the meaning of these white cherry blossoms. After she finished speaking, she looked at Hellion Vivian and smiled. Right. Wei Wei. Right. Hellion Vivian took a step forward, looked at Beligaju, and said boldly and handsomely, Royal, you should give these flowers to someone else. She had never thought of marrying him. Moreover, to him, marrying anyone was the same. She had once heard that the retired emperor had urged the third prince to get married countless times. Unfortunately, the third prince had never had any woman in his eyes. That was why the retired emperor had come up with this plan to let him choose a consort directly at the Flower Appreciation Festival. Looking at the current situation, the third prince was disinclined to fight with the retired emperor. However, he had raised a condition to the retired emperor. As for what that condition was, no one knew. In any case, he was only choosing a consort to deal with the retired emperor. To him, there was no difference between a woman and a man. At most, it would help him escape his current situation. The reason why he chose her was probably to spite the retired emperor. She believed that he was also unwilling to give the flowers to her. If she wasn't such a hedonistic waste and unbearably ugly, he wouldn't have been able to achieve the effect of making the retired emperor unhappy. He wouldn't have said such shocking words. Perhaps, he was already regretting it now. Hellion Vivian mockingly raised the corners of her eyes and looked at Beligaju with a smile. She was very happy for him to choose again. Those young ladies from aristocratic families dreamed of marrying him, especially Hellion Jiaoa. You don't want this flower? Beligaju's sexy thin lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile. His temperament was chilly, like the northern wind blowing in winter, cold to the bone. Shadow, who was standing behind him, stiffened. He knew that his master was angry. His Highness was a person who would laugh even harder when he was angry. That kind of laugh was so cold that it made people shudder. He had not heard his master speak in such a tone for a long time. But this time, the master was really angry. The consequences of his Highness' anger, and Ying couldn't believe it. His Highness's methods were never gentle, and sometimes even vicious. He was indifferent, but that didn't mean he didn't have a temper. This eldest Miss Hellion had truly touched Master's reverse scale. What's the value of something you don't want? Bailey Jiaoju continued to speak. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, his fingers moved. Accompanied by his bone-chilling voice, the white cherry blossom in his palm was crushed bit by bit into pieces by him. The surrounding voices immediately stopped. The Empress looked at his cold face and couldn't help but feel her heart skip a beat. Seeing his deep and sharp eyes without a trace of warmth, she really couldn't figure out what he was thinking at this moment. That year, when she was dealing with his birth mother, the Empress didn't feel this much pressure. But every time she saw him, she would feel fear. Hellion Vivian frowned and looked at him, the corners of her eyes slightly raised. What did his words mean? Beligaju was still wearing his ancient black robe. Apart from the black jade thumb ring on his fingertips, he didn't have any extra pendants. The color of the night made him even more cold and elegant. In the silence, his long dark black curly hair poured down in torrents, reaching his waist. His perfect facial features were like a cold river under the moonlight, so cold that it made people tremble. Hellion Vivian wanted to move her gaze away, but his movements were faster than hers. In a flash, he pulled her arm, and his slender fingers pinched her chin, forcing her to look straight into his eyes. That was a pair of eyes as cold as a cold spring, deep and quiet, like a bottomless well. Once you met it, you would be trapped inside. It seemed like she didn't expect him to make such a move. For a moment, the hall was filled with the sound of people taking deep breath. Hellion Jiao's originally pale and colorless face seemed as if all the air had been sucked out in a split second. She tightly gripped the white handkerchief in her hand and bit her lips so hard that they were practically about to bleed. Even the Empress' eyes widened in disbelief. But Beligaju's expression was indifferent, as if there was no one present. The two of them looked at each other like this. In that moment, it was like the air had stopped. In the silence, Hellion Wei suddenly had an illusion. She only felt that she and he were the only two people left in this world. Her heart couldn't help beating fast. What did this man want to do? You don't want to be this king's concubine? Hellion Vivian was stunned, but then she obediently replied, this humble girl doesn't dare. Doesn't dare? He gave a low laugh. The strength in his hand was not small, so it gave people a kind of cold-to-the-bone hostility. Hellion Vivian couldn't understand why he repeated her words. She heard his deep voice in her ear. Is there anything in this world that you don't dare to do? She didn't want to have anything to do with him. She couldn't even lie like that. She really was a lamb that couldn't be raised properly. Hellion Vivian also narrowed her eyes. She had always avoided provoking this man, because her master had once said that she shouldn't provoke him no matter what. But she didn't expect that she would be chosen by him just because she came here. Now, his current expression made Wei Wei's body also couldn't help but stiffen for a moment. Having interacted with him for a few days, she'd seen him high and mighty, as noble as a god. She'd also seen him when he was drunk, indolent, and demonic. However, she'd never thought that once this man got angry, he'd unexpectedly be so terrifying. Or perhaps, he had always been like this. It was just that he usually hid it too well, so well that everyone almost mistakenly thought that the royal family was the incomparably pure holy son. In his mind, there was no joy or anger at all. But today, she felt his anger. It was like ice rain that could freeze a person from head to toe. Even the blood in their body could be frozen by it. With regards to this highness choice, you dare to make thoughtless remarks. He lowered his eyes and gazed at Wei Wei. That pair of chilly eyes contained all of the world's tyrannical determination to win. His clear and cold words were tantamount to grasping the right to choose in his hands. Slap your mouth. Bailey Jiu opened his hand slightly. The pieces of white cherry blossoms in his hand fell down one after another, making everyone shudder abruptly. Hellion Wei was also angry. Her eyes were filled with anger. Did she make irresponsible remarks? She just didn't agree to it. Could it be that she didn't even have the chance to refuse? When Hellion Jiao heard this, the corners of her mouth revealed a hint of schadenfreude. She was just a slut, so ugly, yet she still dared to take money from His Highness. Wasn't she just looking for death? Hehe, she deserved it. She wanted to see how this little slut would escape this time. Chapter 92. Hellion Vivian knew that everyone was waiting to see her make a fool of herself. But, to slap herself in the face. Sorry. She couldn't do it. At most, she would give it her all. No matter how many experts there were in White Academy, she would kill her way out. It was as if he had sensed the murderous aura emitted from her body. Yuan Ming opened his eyes from the silence, waking up the white cat in the fantasy space. Two figures were faintly discernible, just as they were about to appear behind Hellion Vivian. Belaguju's large palm fell on her waist, slightly pushed, and said in a heavy tone, "As for you, I will deal with you later." Hellion Vivian was stunned, retracted her murderous aura, and looked at him with a slightly puzzled gaze. Could it be that the person he said to slap herself wasn't her? But, what did he mean by deal with her later? Hellion Vivian couldn't help but want to roll her eyes. He might as well say that he wouldn't let her go so easily. She had forgotten that her and the Empress's words just now, it was impossible for someone as smart as him not to see it. She wasn't someone who would be easily manipulated, and she wasn't someone who would tolerate others talking too much. As a prince, wasn't he a bit too narrow-minded? She only said a few words in agreement. Did he have to be so ruthless? Also, if the person who slapped herself wasn't her. Then, Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked in the direction of the Empress, only to see that her face was already pale, as if she was about to faint. Empress Murong tightly clenched her hands, her body softly leaning on the chair. Looking at Belaguju's appearance, she couldn't help but feel a chill from the bottom of her heart. But, in this kind of situation, let her. Empress, you can leave first. The retired emperor, who had been silent all this time, opened his mouth with a smile. What kind of temper this child has, don't you know? You always want to meddle. As an empress, you should act like one. You just need to take care of the harem. You're interfering with the prince's decisions. Are you trying to make Murong Manor take responsibility? Hearing this, Empress Murong's back stiffened. She didn't dare to say anything else. She allowed the palace maids to help her down. The retired emperor wasn't really trying to absolve Empress Murong, He just didn't want anything to affect Belegaju's consort selection. Right now, he was almost suspecting that this stinking brat was deliberately causing trouble for him, so he deliberately created such a thing. It was all for the sake of not choosing a proper concubine. The more the retired emperor thought about it, the more he felt that this was a possibility. He was so stifled that he gnashed his teeth. When he raised his head, he already looked like an old man who was at peace with everything. Old Third, your tone of voice is too fierce. Look at how scared the Hellion family's girl is. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she kept nodding her head. That's right, she was scared. She was supposed to go through the motions, so how did she become the main character? This was simply cheating without following the rules, okay? Belegaju glanced at Hellion Vivian and sneered. She still dared to nod her head. When she talked about him being a homosexual behind his back, how come he didn't see her being afraid of him? When she casually sold his handkerchief to other people, how come he didn't see her being afraid of him? This little thing didn't speak a single word of truth. Hellion Vivian noticed the smile on his face, as if he could see through all her disguises. Even his actions just now were only to warn her not to play tricks in front of him. It seemed that he was still extremely fed up with consort selection. Then why did he still give her flowers? Could it be because of that? Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She didn't have power, and she didn't have influence. Even if she knew he was a homosexual after marriage, she still wouldn't be like the other young ladies of the official's world. For him, this was undoubtedly the best camouflage. In this way, not only could he avoid the retired emperor's repeated warnings, he could also maintain his image as a pure and clean holy son. Black. Too black. Belegaju was too black. Belegaju wouldn't have no reaction when she looked at him like this. He just didn't know what this woman was thinking. However, when that pair of usually indifferent eyes were filled with anger, it was better than doing nothing. The retired emperor looked at the scene below and suddenly frowned. He then raised his arm, looking very tired. All right, it's already so late. I'm also tired. Laro-san, you stay. The rest of you can disperse. As for consort selection, let's wait until after the martial chi competition and the results come out. After saying this, the retired emperor reached out and rubbed his forehead. During this time, he didn't forget to glance at Belegaju. When everyone heard this, they knew what the retired emperor meant. He was saying that today didn't count. Of course, everyone was very smart and didn't say anything. Even Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed with joy. It seemed that the retired emperor, this old man, wanted to privately communicate with the third prince about his consort selection. Sigh, this third prince was really too much. He could give flowers to anyone, but he just had to give them to her. He wanted to use her as a shield to provoke the retired emperor. In the end, well, the retired emperor was really pissed off and even pissed off. After a while, when there was no one left, the retired emperor would definitely fly into a rage. However, no matter what. Finally, there was nothing for her to do. This kind of inexplicable feeling of being the main character was really strange. When he caught the smile on her face, Belegaju's thin lips curved upwards, and there was a trace of devilish coldness. Someone seemed to be happy too early. However, it didn't matter. To catch the prey, one had to do it slowly and gradually. First, let it catch its breath and think that it had escaped this trap. Then, he reached out his hand and stopped it. Seeing it dejected, that would be interesting. What exactly do you want to do? Bang! Once the others had dispersed, the retired emperor's hand slammed heavily on the wooden table. His face carried the solemn expression of someone who had indulged in authority all year round. It was like a sword that had been unsheathed, flashing with an intimidating cold light and a sharp aura. It shocked the tea and snacks on the wooden table to move. Everyone knew that the retired emperor never got angry easily. His smile and anger were all done to achieve a certain goal. However, today, he was really, really angry. His most beloved grandson actually chose a good-for-nothing who had been annulled by someone else. Why didn't this brat think about it? If he married Hellion Vivian, how would he be able to sit in that position in the main hall in the future? At that time, it would definitely cause a discussion in the imperial court. Without a doubt, It would give the 4 great clans the opportunity to splash dirty water on him. He didn't believe that this stinky brat couldn't see through all of this. This child, from a young age, had displayed wisdom and calmness that didn't match his age. Now that he was already old, perhaps he wouldn't be able to make it through this winter. His son also didn't live up to expectations. He was completely bewitched by Murong and didn't have his own opinion on anything. Rather than letting the throne be ruined by his son who was addicted to women, it would be better to give it to this stinky brat. However, he just didn't live up to expectations at this crucial moment. Chapter 93. Eunuch's son, who had been by Belegaju's side all year round, didn't even dare to breathe loudly. He clutched the handkerchief in his hand and continuously wiped his forehead, quietly wiping away the cold sweat that had appeared. He was still thinking in his heart, "Master, you mustn't say anything to provoke the retired emperor. Later on, the retired emperor will definitely be angered to death. He will definitely order to kill all the people who know the inside story. In the end, the unlucky ones will be them, the servants." "What did you say?" Belegaju yawned as if nothing had happened. He turned around and tidied up his sleeves, leisurely, as always, indifferent and elegant. Looking at his appearance, the retired emperor fiercely gnashed his teeth. "That's right, that's right. At that time, I promised you that as long as you were willing to choose a consort, you can choose anyone. It's good that Imperial Grandfather remembers the promise." Belegaju indifferently raised his eyes. His tone was light, and his words were languid. "I thought that Imperial Grandfather was going to go back on his word again." Eunuch's son was speechless. "Amitabha, Imperial family are, my ancestor are, you should speak less. Don't you see that the retired emperor is so angry that his beard is blowing up? You still dare to speak." The retired emperor tightly clenched the teacup in his hand. His white eyebrows twitched twice in anger. "You. How could I have thought that you would choose? Who? Tell me, why did you choose Hellion Vivian? During the test, she won. This was part of our agreement. I also had no choice." Belegaju's tone was light, as if he was just stating a fact. However, this kind of fact made the retired emperor want to curse out loud. "You have no choice. How many excuses and reasons did you use to escape from my consort selection banquet? Now you're saying that you have no choice. Are you the kind of person to be manipulated by others?" The retired emperor took a deep breath. He originally wanted to control his volume, but the result was not good. "You already knew that she would win." Belegaju still had to be polite and give the retired emperor some face, so he didn't directly answer. Instead, he thought for a while, and then lightly said, "I thought about it." That meant he knew. The retired emperor gritted his teeth and said, "That Hellion Jiawa is the real one with both talent and affection. It is even possible that the Phoenix girl's bloodline is hidden in her body. Yet you insist on choosing a dandy who doesn't even know martial qi? Tell me, why did it have to be her? She's more interesting." Even when faced with this kind of raging retired emperor, Bailey Jioju's attitude didn't change in the slightest. He was still there flicking his fingers, as if he wanted to flick the pollen off his fingertips. However, when he thought of the ridicule exposed by that fearless little fox just now, the light in his eyes became somewhat ice-cold in a flash. Eunuch's son was dumbfounded. "It was because of this reason. Just because of this, you insist on going against the Imperial retired emperor. Master, aren't you clearly not cooperating with the retired emperor and acting in a fit of pique?" As expected, the retired emperor was unable to restrain his anger and immediately ordered, "Good. Very good. Interesting, right? Someone come, take him away for me. I want to see if he still finds that girl interesting after locking him up for 3 days and 3 nights. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. One must know that since childhood, the retired emperor had never punished the third prince. Now, he unexpectedly hardened his heart and wanted to lock him up for confinement. The people serving on the left and right glanced at each other, not daring to step forward. They were not afraid of being punished, they were afraid that the retired emperor would regret it after doing this. The atmosphere suddenly froze to the extreme. No one could have foreseen that the retired emperor would be spoken to this extent. Even Shadow was pressured by that thick oppressive feeling and didn't raise his head. If he didn't know about Miss Hellion's behavior these past few days, he would have thought that Master had a different kind of feeling towards her. In reality, thinking about it carefully, perhaps Master just couldn't forgive her for casually kissing him, throwing him 20 tails, and treating him as a homosexual girl. What are you still staring blankly for? The retired emperor angrily stood up and even accidentally broke a teacup. Eunuch Sun was scared by that noise and trembled. He hurriedly went to look at his master. Belegaju's expression was still indifferent. The retired emperor couldn't do anything to him, so he turned to Tu Su Feng and gave him a meaningful glance. Tu Su Feng held back his laughter for a long time, lightly coughed twice, and then said, "Please calm down first. Isn't there still a martial chi competition in a few days? The imperial concubine selection will also depend on the results at that time. As for the royal family, just let him continue to stay at White Academy. Just treat it as his punishment." No one knew that when the retired emperor heard Tu Su Feng's words, he slightly sighed in relief. Just do as you say. Let him stay at White Academy and don't come back, so as to avoid this old man seeing that icy face of his and being annoyed. As he spoke, the retired emperor flicked his sleeve and wanted to leave. He paused his steps, turned around again, and cleared his throat. That icy boy is very picky when it comes to food. You take care of him a bit. Also, if he doesn't want to go to class, don't let him go. It's enough, understand? To put it bluntly, he was still reluctant. Tu Su Feng smiled gently and elegantly. Don't worry, I know. Is he still in the inferior compound? The retired emperor thought for a while and asked another question. Tu Su Feng's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, your grandson is right next to you, but you don't ask him. Why do you have to beat around the bush like this? Yes, he is. The retired emperor sighed deeply. That year's matter was all my fault. If it wasn't for me, that fire. Forget it, he can choose whoever he wants. Tu Su Feng smiled and answered, yes. Everyone knew that the retired emperor doted on the third prince to the extreme. But this doting was mixed with guilt that had never been told to anyone. If it wasn't for the fact that the retired emperor was too impatient and announced to the world that Bailey Jiaoju had 3 types of elements, there wouldn't be so many people, in order to obtain power, who had just broken through the martial chi stage, such a vicious attack. That year, what his precious grandson lost was not only martial chi, but also all his hopes for humanity. Ever since his imperial mother passed away, he and that girl depended on each other for survival. But who would have thought that in order to climb up, that girl would collude with outsiders? When he was least prepared, she led the wolf into the house and set the palace on fire. That almost made his precious grandson lose his life. From then on, his precious grandson never got close to any woman again. He was really scared. During that time, his precious grandson didn't even leave the house. After he was scolded, he returned to his previous apathy and indifferent attitude towards everything. But as his grandfather, the retired emperor understood better than anyone that that matter had definitely taken root in his grandson's heart. It wasn't that easy to get rid of it. Chapter 94. Inside the trading courtyard, Grandmaster Zizun suddenly stood up. Looking at Hellion Vivian who was drinking tea, he walked back and forth. This won't do. Disciple, it's not that easy to avoid being targeted by that icy brat. What's more, you rejected him in front of so many people. This time, he'll definitely hold a grudge against you. Master, don't worry. The retired emperor has already made the third prince stay. He'll probably punish him. Such a disobedient grandson, he definitely needs to be punished. As Hellion Vivian spoke, she stroked the white cat in her bosom lazily. Grandmaster Zizun shook his head and said, Girl, you don't know how much the retired emperor dotes on that icy brat. Listen to Master's words, we'll avoid him. Speaking of which, Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something as her eyes tightened. He just said that he'll deal with me in a while. Grandmaster Zizun blew his white beard. What did Master say? You didn't take it seriously. Hellion Vivian lazily yawned. How could I have thought that he would choose me? This third prince is really too bored. He wants to find some excitement from me to make the retired emperor angry. Maybe that's the case. Grandmaster Zizun sighed. The retired emperor also wants someone to accompany him. His Highness, this person, lives too alone. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She didn't say anything. Grandmaster Zizun seemed to have sunk into the past. He told Hellion Vivian everything that happened that year, including the part where the third prince was betrayed. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Master, what are you trying to say by telling me all this? What Master means is, if it doesn't work out, you should just marry him. Grandmaster Zizun raised his head and looked at the ceiling. In any case, you don't have anyone you like. Don't tell me that you're still thinking about that Murong Changfeng. Hellion Vivian rubbed her forehead. Master, don't use words to provoke me. How many times have I said it? I'm not interested in marriage. She finally understood what it felt like to be urged to get married. Really, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was not selling leftover vegetable leaves at the market. She was not preparing to sell them at a low price after processing them. Alright, even though she was considered an old lady in ancient times, in modern times, she was still considered a little fresh meat, okay? Alright, if you really don't want to marry that icy brat, then you must first leave the White Academy. Grandmaster Zizun looked at her, the light in his eyes slightly sinking. Master also has to go down the mountain in these 2 days, busy with the martial chi competition that will be held soon. You were in the limelight at the Flower Appreciation Festival, so it's hard to avoid attracting jealousy. Master is afraid that if Master leaves and something happens to you at that time, Master won't be able to rush back in time to stand up for you. Furthermore, looking at that icy brat's intentions, he will look for you tonight. The most important thing is that I've called you over this time because I want you to leave the academy for 3 days to participate in an armament convention. Wei Wei's interest was piqued as she lifted her eyes. Armament convention? Is Master talking about the armament assembly where we can compete in the loading and unloading of armaments and also conduct the auction of armaments? That's right, it's that armament assembly. Grandmaster Zizun smiled. Right now, these people are ridiculing you because you still aren't a genuine armament master. Only by obtaining recognition there will you have the qualifications to be an armament master and make others believe in you. The armament assembly was extremely important to every armament master. This was a place to unearth talents. It would be held once every 3 years for the sake of unceasingly discovering new blood for armament masters. Grandmaster Zizun wanted Hellion Vivian to go participate for 2 reasons. First, as he said, Hellion Vivian had to pass this test to prove her own strength. Second, the armament assembly was a gathering of talents. Only by encountering a worthy opponent could his obedient disciple's competitive spirit be aroused. He heard that the world's second-ranked young master Wu Shuang would also participate in this year's armament assembly. With regards to this son of his old friend, he had previously done some research. At such a young age, he had already made a good armament. In terms of innate talent, he really didn't know if the other party was stronger or if his disciple was stronger. If it was up to him, this obedient disciple of his was just too good at hiding herself. Until now, she hadn't allowed him to tell other people about her mastery of armaments. Those elders of the academy often felt sorry for him. There were also quite a few teachers who sent people to his place. It was precisely because they saw that his obedient disciple was easy to bully and wanted to replace his obedient disciple's position. Humph. They really thought that he was senile and couldn't understand anything. His obedient disciple was sensible and didn't want to cause trouble for him. Otherwise, he would have already made an armament to torture them to death. However, right now, Grandmaster Zizun's only worry was that he was afraid that his obedient disciple would find it troublesome, so she didn't want to go. Speaking of which, on this point, she really was exactly the same as that icy brat. Grandmaster Zizun often had a kind of misconception. Sometimes, when he saw his obedient disciple, it was as if he saw that aloof and remote royal family. Indolent, yet never losing his bearing. Seemingly indifferent, yet holding the universe in his hands. Turning his hand to make clouds and turning his hand to make rain. However, the only difference was that that icy brat's heart was too black. It was still his obedient disciple who was cute. Using Nangong Lai's words, this group of old men, were all scared of being abused by Arju. With the royal family at the bottom, he reckoned that whoever they looked at would feel satisfied. Seeing that Hellion Vivian hadn't said anything for so long, Grandmaster even thought that this matter was hopeless. Just as he was about to droop his shoulders, he heard Hellion Vivian ask with a smile on her face, "That armament convention, how do I go?" "Master, here's an invitation card." Grandmaster's eyes lit up. He turned around and flipped out a tungsten gold-colored invitation card. "Half a year ago, they already sent me an invitation card. This one right now was taken from Tu Laro. In any case, he has a lot of disciples, and he also has a lot of invitations for the armament convention. He doesn't lack this one. You can take this and go in. No one will dare to stop you." Hellion Vivian took that invitation card, but her mind was thinking about another matter. She could casually participate in that armament competition, but what did the auction represent? It represented money, such a good opportunity to make money. As the owner of an armament convention, how could she not participate? In a while, she still had to bring the Hay family's young master along to put up a front. There was no time to lose. She didn't want to be intercepted by the third prince before she even left the door. That man was even more difficult to deal with than she had imagined. She had to first hide. Let's make it clear first. She wasn't afraid of him. It was just that provoking this kind of person was too troublesome. "Master, I'll leave first." Hellion Vivian had always been a person of action. She had never wasted an opportunity. She said, "I'll ask Master to help me apply for a few days of leave from the academy." Grandmaster subconsciously nodded. To tell the truth, he was still a bit dizzy. What exactly did he say to make that disciple of his, who had never liked to be in the limelight, so easily agree? Chapter 95. When Hellion Vivian returned to her residence, the first thing she did was to pack up her bag. She didn't need to bring too many daily necessities. The most important thing was to bring the materials and money for martial arts. If she was bored on the road, she could make a few more martial arts. When the time comes, she could sell them for more money. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that Belagaju's movements would be so fast. Hellion Vivian looked at the layers of guards outside the inferior courtyard. She knew that she couldn't go back. She just went to the toilet and he came. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. Her figure flashed and hid under a big tree. Her back was tightly pressed against the trunk, only revealing a pair of clear eyes. "Your Highness." Someone knelt in front of Belagaju and said in a low voice, "Everything is normal." The man raised his eyes and glanced in their direction. Hellion Vivian quickly withdrew her gaze. She had the illusion that her breathing had stopped. Huff, huff, she was almost discovered. Although this man didn't have martial chi, his alertness was higher than anyone else. She didn't know if it was because he was used to being in a high position. Even though they were so far apart, Hellion Vivian could feel the oppressive feeling coming from his body. Hellion Vivian just stood there. Her ears were slightly tilted and she didn't move. Now, even the slightest movement would attract the other party's attention. She believed in her concealment and disguise skills. In order to complete the mission, she stayed in the forest for 2 days and 1 night. She wasn't discovered. This was the instinct of an arms tycoon. She made the most accurate judgment at the most appropriate time. When he entered the house, she would withdraw. In a hurry, it was easy to panic. She wasn't anxious. The ones who should be anxious were the guards who had been hiding around her from the beginning. In a while, maybe they could help her delay Belagaju. Hellion Vivian smiled. There was a bit of evil in her laziness. "Wait outside." The man's voice was still cold and indifferent, but there was a trace of playfulness in it. Eunuch Sun was a little stunned. He didn't quite understand His Highness' decision. Normally, His Highness would not have reacted this way if he had encountered such a situation. What exactly was going on between His Highness and this Miss Hellion? Hellion Vivian didn't care what Eunuch Sun was thinking. Taking advantage of the opportunity, she flashed and escaped from the inferior compound. She hadn't finished packing her things yet. Leaving just like that? Thinking about it, he was really unwilling. However, it was better than being blocked. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian turned around and smiled. She blew a cool kiss towards the window and said goodbye to the handsome royal. Oh, no, there was no need to say goodbye. That's more like it. Hellion Wei Wei was originally an arms tycoon, so she was most adept at this kind of traveling at night. She first bypassed several locust trees to avoid the academy's tight encirclement, as well as those teachers holding lanterns on night patrol. She successfully infiltrated the superior compound, and at this time, after Bailey Jiaoju pushed open the door and saw the half-packed package on the bed, his pair of eyes instantly became extremely cold. With a swish, he pulled the curtain shut and turned around with an indifferent expression. Then he slowly walked out. His footsteps were somewhat slow, as if he didn't care. But no one discovered that his eyes slowly narrowed in the darkness. The bottom of his eyes that couldn't be seen had a coldness that made people's hearts clench. Then, he laughed. His thin lips slightly curved, seemingly there but not there, carrying a bewitching coldness that made people's hearts tremble. Eunuch Sun's eyes slightly raised. When he met the coldness in the royal's eyes, he was completely stunned. The foot that originally wanted to enter the room was also abruptly pulled back. Where is she? Beligaju only asked this one question. His voice was so cold that it made the shadows shiver for no reason. One of the shadows replied, reporting to your highness, Miss Hellion should have gone to the toilet. It was inconvenient for us to follow her, so we, toilet? The coldness in Beligaju's eyes faded a little, and he walked back in. It was only a small room, but the furnishings were very neat. That package was an unusual eyesore. His slender fingers opened it from the middle. There weren't any clothes inside, but instead piles of black iron. However, those black iron weren't very rare. They could be bought at any martial arts store. In the middle of the night, she went to the toilet. As for packing these things, Beligaju's slightly narrowed eyes quickly flashed through something. Slowly, a bone-chilling coldness rose. He still underestimated her. An untrained fox would always first come over and obediently let you touch her. Then, she would ruthlessly give you a claw. Everything was normal. She had clearly planned to leave from the very beginning. Good, very good. If she wanted to play, he would play with her. Beligaju curved his lips into a smile. It was like some kind of black fog was emitted from his eyes, making people feel cold to the bone. He threw away the package in his hand. The iron pieces made a crackling sound. No one dared to speak. The air seemed to be frozen. Everyone didn't dare to look at him. The shadows lowered their heads even more. The matter of guarding Miss Hellion was given to them by His Highness, but they actually didn't know when Miss Hellion disappeared, that Miss Hellion was really bold. Master already told her to wait, but she still didn't want to see him. If she was caught by His Highness at this moment, I'm afraid, Beligaju's eyes sank slightly. His voice was also cold to the extreme. He ordered one word at a time, go find her for me. She still hadn't left the academy. That tea was still hot. Maybe she really went to the toilet. Only after she came back from the toilet and saw the guards outside, she took the opportunity to escape. She really was a clever little fox that made people want to chop off her claws. At this moment, Hellion Vivian indeed hadn't left the academy. She still had to find her companions. Only, from far away, she saw a large number of guards moving quickly, as if they were blocking the entrances of every branch. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. He deserved to be the third prince. She even thought that he would be misled by those shadows' words for a few minutes. She didn't expect that his reaction would be so fast. He immediately knew that she wasn't going to the toilet, but rather to escape. As expected, he wasn't easy to deal with. However, relying on these guards, they wanted to catch her. She reckoned that they were all busy blocking the entrances. They simply didn't think that she never planned to leave now. If she didn't bring her own facade along, it would be useless for her to go to that armament convention. First of all, she had to first meet up with Hazy. The person who passed on the message should have already told Hazy what she wanted to say. When the great young master dressed up, it would always take some effort. However, Shouldn't she let Little White use the magic power in its body to first summon a divine beast over? Otherwise, to go to such a distant place like the summit of the sea, an ordinary carriage would need to travel for 10 days before arriving. By that time, the armament convention would have already ended. Just as Hellion Vivian closed her eyes to think about things, someone suddenly pulled her from behind. A faint sandalwood scent burrowed into the tip of her nose. Chapter 96. Hellion Vivian turned her head and looked over. Her long, shapely eyebrows wrinkled. It was actually Murong Chang Feng. How could this scum appear here? You said you already put down my family's young master, yet you still came in the middle of the night to wait. The servant's tone of voice made Hellion Vivian coldly laugh. She didn't say anything and directly pushed Murong Chang Feng's hand away. If it weren't for the night being too dark, the ridicule in her eyes would have been exposed unintentionally. Murong Chang Feng didn't expect himself to be pushed away. His fingers stiffened. That servant was actually not happy. I say, Miss Hellion, you've already come, what are you still putting on airs for? Don't tell me this is all a coincidence. You don't know this is the courtyard where my family's young master lives. Hellion Vivian. Hihi, she really didn't know. Enough. Murong Chang Feng's voice faintly stopped that servant's words. However, it could be seen that he and that servant were basically thinking the same thing. Since you've already come, just say it clearly. Hellion Vivian sized him up with a glance and turned around to leave. What was there to say to a scum? Not to mention, Third Prince was such a smart person. Maybe he'd find the superior compound in a moment. She didn't want to waste time in this kind of place. Hellion Vivian, what do you mean? Murong Chang Feng extended his hand and blocked her path with his slightly raised sleeve. You should have played enough with the game of loosening the reins in order to get closer, right? You felt that this young master made you lose face before, so you retaliated several times in a row in front of people. What do you still want now? You want this young master to regret. Hellion Vivian, who do you think you are? Being blocked like this, Hellion Vivian simply crossed her arms and raised her head in amusement. Murong Chang Feng, I advise you to look in the mirror more in the future. Do you really think you're so handsome that you can shock the heavens and make ghosts weep and that I can't live without you? What you said, I'll return it to you. Murong Chang Feng, who do you think you are? Loosening the reins in order to get closer? Didn't I say it clearly enough? I was blind in the past, that's why I fell for a scumbag like you. You're still young, so it's inevitable that you don't have good taste. This is the same reason why you fell for Hellion Jiaowa. Now that my mind is sound, I want to turn over a new leaf. Do you understand? If you understand, then get out of the way, as expected of the woman that I have taken a fancy to. She's ruthless enough. I like her. Suddenly, an evil laugh sounded from behind the two of them. Hellion Vivian looked back and saw the late second young master of the Hay family standing under the cherry blossom tree. He was holding a package in one hand and patting the back of his hand with the other. There was a hint of playfulness in his arrogance. He looked like he was watching a show. Murong Chang Feng had originally been mocked by Hellion Vivian's words until his face turned white. Now that he heard Hay Zeddy's words, anger rose in his eyes. I didn't expect that the grand young master of the Hay family would do things so sneakily. Sneaking around? Young Master Murong, don't talk nonsense. Wei and I are in love with each other. She asked me out this time, not you. Hazy slowly walked over. His waist-length cloak fluttered in the night wind, giving off a sense of oppression that was hard to ignore. Hellion Vivian heard his words and didn't say anything. She only looked at him indifferently. Did you bring everything? Humph. Hazy said while not forgetting to raise his chin in Murong Chang Feng's direction. That meant you see, I already said that she came to look for me. Hellion Vivian didn't want to play out any unexpected drama. She reached out and pulled Hazy over. Her tone was indifferent. If you brought everything, then let's go. Why are you wasting words with him? Hearing this, Murong Chang Feng's face suddenly became cold to the extreme. He ground his teeth and made creaking sounds. The little servant standing beside him opened his mouth into an O shape. He didn't expect that this woman really didn't come to look for the young master, but rather to wait for young Master Hay. This wasn't the main point. The main point was the young master's expression. The little servant somewhat didn't dare to raise his head. Murong Chang Feng seemed to have reached the extreme, but didn't have a place to vent his anger. He kicked the little servant's body. "What are you still staring blankly for? Light the lantern and return to the room." "Yes, yes." The little servant was kicked until he almost spat out blood. The pain made his usual arrogance and complacency completely disappear. He bent his waist and lowered his head, carefully serving, for fear that he would provoke his master again. This kind of noise naturally alarmed the other people at the superior compound. Although the men and women lived separately, people like Helian Jiawa would always send servants to each courtyard to inquire for information. Therefore, the superior compound didn't have any secrets to her. Not long after, she found out what happened at Murong Chang Feng's place. Her eyes slightly brightened. She slowly hooked up a malicious smile. Privately leaving the hospital, Helian Vivian, "You really dare. Someone come." Helian Jiawa, who originally already took off her clothes, put on a cloak. Her thin lips slightly curved. "We're also going outside to walk around." "Yes." The servant girl by Helian Jiawa's side understood her young miss's thoughts better than anyone else. Knowing that she wanted to go give that slut a good look, her face also followed with a smile. The night deepened. Helian Vivian saw that wherever she went, there were layers upon layers of imperial bodyguards. Her eyebrows wrinkled into a ball. This third prince's methods were really ruthless. Just for the sake of catching her, so many people were mobilized. This was the rhythm of waiting until she was caught, then she would be dismembered into 10,000 pieces. All of this was provoked by you. Hay family's young master stood behind her, impatiently raising his eyebrows. Helian Vivian grunted. "Third prince's people." Hazy heard the 3 words third prince and narrowed his eyes. "Speaking of which, why did the royal family choose you? Didn't you think that choosing me would be easier to create a sensation?" Helian Vivian laughed. "It can't be that because I'm too beautiful, he was bewitched by my beauty." Hazy's mouth twitched. "Beauty? You? So, he must have chosen me to anger the retired emperor." Helian Vivian shrugged. "You can't reject a marriage like this." Hazy found it easier to accept this explanation. "When I said that I wanted to marry you, it wasn't to anger my old man. I was sincere." Hee. Helian Vivian only gave him 2 words. "Sincere. This face of mine, can you accept it?" Hazy looked at those imperial bodyguards who were walking back and forth. After thinking for a while, he seriously replied, "Actually, it's the same even if you blow out the candles. Anyway, your figure is not bad." "Thank you, but your figure, I don't fancy it." Helian Vivian laughed evilly. "Even if I blow out the candles, the royal family can still beat you." Hazy was stunned, then slowly curved his thin lips. His fingers lightly slid through Helian Vivian's hair, a trace of sexiness appeared on his handsome and domineering face. "Woman, this prince seems to be more and more interested in you." Chapter 97. Hazy, do you need me to remind you one more time? Helian Vivian took his hand away and said indifferently, "We're cooperating right now." Hazy smiled. "To be honest, we have such a tacit understanding, we'll definitely be very suitable together. You and your right hand have such a tacit understanding, why don't you just directly marry your right hand?" Helian Vivian dropped this sentence and turned around to change her position, continuing to conceal herself. The corner of Hazy's mouth twitched twice. The right hand she's talking about better not mean what he's thinking. She's a girl, how can she be even more daring than a man when she speaks? That won't do, the 2 of us are too big of a target. Helian Vivian turned her head and glanced at the Hay family's young master. "We'll split up and act separately. When the time comes, we'll meet again at the armaments convention." Hazy didn't care. After all, this young master can swagger out. "Then, young master, you can slowly walk." Helian Vivian raised the corner of her mouth and disappeared into the night. She didn't think that the news of the Hay family's young master being together with her wouldn't be known by others. Pushing Haze out to divert that person's line of sight, this method was still pretty good. Your Highness, we've already investigated. Shadow looked at his master's demonically cold pair of eyes and swallowed his saliva. Miss Weiwei is currently at the Superior Compound. Beligaju absent-mindedly raised his eyes. Superior Compound? What did she go there for? It seems. Shadow paused at this point and braced himself. She went to look for the Hay family's second young master. Hearing this, Beligaju's stride seemed to stiffen. Then, he tilted his head and laughed lowly. His bangs followed his movements and slightly drooped down. Looking at him from afar, he actually looked a bit lonely. When Shadow wanted to take a closer look, he saw Bailey Jiaju suddenly raise his eyes and unhurriedly take off the white glove on his hand and throw it to the side. His eyes were frighteningly bright, without the slightest hint of loneliness. Instead, it made him look more elegant and dangerous than usual, as if something was about to burst out of his eyes. And Ying didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but he felt that the martial qi in his body seemed to be affected by some kind of fluctuation, and even his breathing became somewhat difficult. The moment his fingers touched his chest, that strange feeling mysteriously disappeared. Then, he heard his master's voice, which carried a cold indifference amidst the elegance, then capture his eyes as well. No matter who she's with, bring her to me. Shadow trembled and respectfully bowed his head. Yes. Don't remove the other checkpoints either. Beligaju pondered for a moment, and his cold voice carried a smile that made people's scalps tingle. That woman is best at making a diversion. Shadow accepted the order, but he couldn't help but say in his heart, His Highness' thoughts are still as deep as before. He didn't remove the checkpoints at all. Right now, even if Hellion Vivian had 3 heads and 6 arms, she still wouldn't be able to escape. His Highness really didn't treat anyone carelessly. With this kind of attitude, don't mention a woman without martial qi, even those experts would have to expend a lot of effort to get out. However, Beligaju felt that this wasn't enough. His beautiful phoenix eyes once again narrowed. Keep an eye on the commerce courtyard. She's very likely to contact Jizun. Want to leave with he eyes? He'd like to see if he could pull out her claws. How could she leave? Yes. Shadow's heart thumped. He felt that the current His Highness was even more frightening than before. If it was said that when he discovered that Hellion Vivian was missing, his face revealed anger, then now, that pair of eyes that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling emitted a demonic chill that could almost freeze a person's blood. He'd followed His Highness for so many years, but he'd never seen him like today. Moreover, in this world, there was simply no one who could truly oppose His Highness. In the past, His Highness had never cared about these things. But when His Highness became serious, he was even more frightening than the retired emperor. Capturing Hellion Vivian was something that would happen sooner or later. The entire White Academy was surrounded by their people. Even he, who was clear about all the deployments, might not be able to escape, let alone Hellion Vivian who knew nothing about all this. However, did Hellion Vivian really know nothing about this? Of course not. Know yourself and know your enemy, then you'll be victorious in 100 battles. How could she act rashly when she didn't understand anything? On the contrary, she was very clear about Beligaju's deployments and plans. Because she wasn't at any other place at all. Instead, she'd infiltrated into the ranks of the Imperial bodyguards. Wherever Beligaju went, she would follow. But even so, when she heard Beligaju's voice, she still couldn't help but shiver. This man really didn't give her any chance to live. Fortunately, she could rely on her past life's experience to continue her disguise. Otherwise, wherever she went, she'd be stopped and killed. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and continued to act as her bodyguard. For the first time, she was glad that her skin was dark enough. Mixing in with this group of men, she wouldn't be found out. Thinking carefully, where did she provoke such a difficult man to deal with? Didn't she just reject him once? Wasn't the third prince a bit too fragile? He didn't really want to marry her. Hellion Vivian sighed in her heart. Yuan Ming arrogantly comforted her. You can tell that man that the person you love is me. Don't let him steal your love. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Shut up, thank you. Woman, don't deny it anymore. If you don't love me, why would you hug me so tightly? Yuan Ming proudly snorted twice. Your little thoughts have already been seen through by me. Hellion Vivian was melancholy. Where did you get your confidence from? Wake up, will you? Forget it, since you're so shy, I won't force you. But speaking of which, that man, even now, I still can't see through him. You should be careful, I keep feeling that things aren't that simple. Yuan Ming recovered his normal tone. Looking at Belegaju's back, the light in his eyes deepened. Hellion Vivian nodded. She always knew that the third prince was very difficult to deal with. In this empire that respected martial arts, he was actually able to make the people from the 4 great clans fear his existence even though he had lost his martial chi. That meant that not only his methods, even his thoughts were unmatched in the entire Dragon War Empire. It seemed that Hazy wouldn't be able to hold on for long. She had to think of another way to evacuate as soon as possible. How's Xiao Bai's side? Hellion Vivian followed the bodyguards and walked forward. At the same time, she used her consciousness to communicate with Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming's voice was heavy. Everything is going according to plan. After leaving the academy, there will be a mythological beast that will take you down the mountain. Mythological beast. Hellion Vivian's footsteps stopped. A shrewd light flashed through her long and narrow eyes. Chapter 98. Your Highness, we've found young Master He. A shadow ran over and leaned over to whisper a few words into Belegaju's ear. Belegaju's beautiful eyes didn't have the slightest ripple, but the cold wind brought by those wide sleeves made his back look even more unapproachable, extremely cold. After a short while, Belegaju arrived in front of the detained He. The shadows naturally wouldn't really do anything to young Master He. He had only blocked the exit. However, just this alone was already extremely daring. In the entire capital, only the third Prince Belegaju dared to block the second young master of the He family. When Hazy saw him, the corner of his mouth hooked up. Your Highness is truly elegant, not sleeping at this late hour. Isn't the second young master also not sleeping? Belegaju's voice was very indifferent, as if he didn't care about anything, but it carried an irresistible demonic chill. Where is she? When Hazy was blocked, he cursed in his heart, fuck. Then, he started to think of all kinds of excuses, thinking about how he would greet the third prince when he arrived, and how he would gradually change the situation. But the third prince didn't play his cards according to common sense at all, and immediately asked, where is she? Such elegant and direct words made He completely stupefied. All the plans he made before were completely for naught. The third prince clearly knew more than he thought. When he thought of this, Hazy straightforwardly smiled evilly. If the royal is referring to Wei Wei, she has already left the academy. The 2 words Wei Wei made Belegaju's eyes darken, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even deeper than usual. Left. That's right, she has already left. Hazy spoke with incomparable sincerity. We originally agreed to go down the mountain together, but later, she seemed to be very anxious and left early. Right now, she should be close to the main road. If Your Highness sends someone to chase after her, they should be able to catch up. Belegaju looked deeply at him, elegant and indifferent. I still have to thank the second young master for providing me with such an important clue. This commoner only did what a commoner should do. He curled his lips into a smile, his face tinged with a bit of pride. He felt that he had never been so quick-witted before. Bailey Jiaoju unhurriedly turned the black jade ring on his finger as he faintly instructed Shadow. Let second young master leave. Yes. Shadow hesitated for a moment, somewhat not daring to believe that his family's highness would just let the He family's young master go like this. He clearly had something going on between him and Miss Hellion. Maybe if he investigated, he could find out. However, Belegaju didn't think so. That little fox purposely released He as a smokescreen in order to delay him. There was no need for him to waste time on He. Furthermore, continue searching for this lord and narrow down the search area. She hasn't gone anywhere, she's still at the superior compound. Upon hearing this, not only did He, who was about to leave, freeze. Even Hellion Vivian, who was hidden in the group, felt her heart skip a beat. Hei's sly had been seen through. Not only that, that man actually used reverse thinking to analyze Hei's words and locked onto her correct position. This time, her situation was even worse. Moreover, since the third prince already gave the order to let Hei's go, then Hei's must go. In other words, from now on, she really was fighting by herself. Hellion Wei bit her thin lips and looked at the silhouette in the dim light of night that was still as tall and straight as a pine tree. That person's every movement was neither hurried nor impatient, his long and jade-like body tidied up his sleeves, as if everything was within his control. Or perhaps, it could be said that he did it on purpose. He deliberately took Hei's away, thereby severing the connection between her and Hei's hair. Without Hei's, she could still succeed. Although it would be a bit more difficult, but if it wasn't difficult, then it would be called concealment. Hellion Vivian lowered her head and followed those imperial bodyguards back to the courtyard. Unfortunately, she was only one step away from the entrance. Just that one step away, she could only look on helplessly as the academy's main door closed in front of her, because right now, any abnormal movements would be detected by the other party. She couldn't take the slightest risk. The third prince was too smart, one couldn't see through his tricks. Right now, she could only deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, keeping her eyes and ears open, and wait for the right time to think of a way to sneak out. However, Hellion Vivian didn't see that when Beligaju raised his eyes, a trace of coldness flashed through his eyes. He slowly curved his lips, as if he was displeased, but also as if he was pondering. He wanted to see how she would deal with Hei's after he took him away. Look for him. Or continue to hide like this. But, no matter what it was, if she was smart enough, then she wouldn't drag other people into this. Because that would make him very, very unhappy. When Shadow, who was following beside Beligaju, saw his master's expression, he couldn't help but secretly break out in cold sweat for a certain someone. His Highness was really angry this time. In all these years, there had never been a time like this, where His Highness was so unwilling to let go. In the past, His Highness was neither hot nor cold towards anything. No one could guess what he was thinking, so much so that no one could cause any of his emotions to fluctuate. Hellion Vivian was the first person to make His Highness go through so much trouble. Shadow almost didn't dare to imagine what would happen to her if she was really caught by His Highness. Achoo! Hellion Vivian covered her mouth and sneezed softly. From the time she started to plan this escape, 2 hours had already passed. She had to be quick. Right now, Beligaju didn't have time to spare, but when he was free, his first reaction would be to check on her. At that time, even this bodyguard's skin on her body wouldn't be able to protect her. Should she be happy or should she admit that she was unlucky? After doing so many things, this was the first time she was forced into such a situation. However, the real show had just begun. Right now, it was the time when humans were the most tired, and also the time when it was the easiest to make mistakes. She could totally make use of this point. Pitter patter patter. A light rain suddenly fell from the sky. Shadow hurriedly opened an umbrella for Beligaju. As he walked forward, he reported, "Your Highness, we've searched the entire superior compound, but didn't find any trace of Miss Hellion." Still didn't find her? Beligaju's hand slightly paused for a moment. He actually underestimated that little fox's tenacity. Good, very good. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, his voice was neither cold nor light, switch to another group of bodyguards and continue the search. The ones who are switched out are not allowed to leave the hospital, they are to rest where they are. It was easy for an exhausted person to have a loophole. He absolutely wouldn't allow this kind of loophole to appear in his plan. Hellion Vivian originally thought that after being switched out, she would be able to return to her room. She didn't expect. This third prince wasn't just smart, he was simply too two-faced, so ruthless that it almost made people unable to withstand. Chapter 99. At this moment, an enchanting figure walked over with 2 servant girls behind her. One servant girl held a lantern while the other held an umbrella. In this white academy, It was like a painting of misty rain in Jiangnan. It was Helian Jiawa. She wore a red cloak. Although that small face didn't have makeup, it was more gentle and beautiful than usual. When she saw Beligaju, she shyly saluted and then said to Eunuch Sun, who was still busy, "I heard that eldest sister disappeared, so I wanted to come out and look for her." "Eunuch Sun, do you have news of her?" Eunuch Sun had already fainted from being so busy. It was already so late, and now he only wanted to sleep. He tiredly shook his head and didn't say anything. Helian Vivian, who was standing among the bodyguards, moved her body and stared at the two servant girls behind Helian Jiawa. No matter what the purpose of Helian Jiawa coming out at this time was, for her, perhaps this was a good opportunity. "Then, did you find young Master He?" Helian Jiawa continued to speak, her beautiful eyebrows lightly wrinkled, as if she was worried about Helian Vivian's conduct. "My eldest sister always does things without regard for consequences. Old Master He didn't agree to her and He Zeddy's matter, so she went to the superior compound in the middle of the night. Now, she's gone missing. I'm really worried that she'll take things too hard and ruin her own reputation." Eunuch Sun raised his eyebrows. This meant that Miss Vivian did this today because she wanted to elope with young Master He? Just after His Highness gave her the white cherry blossoms, she eloped with another man. Eunuch Sun cautiously raised his eyes, and under that faint moonlight, he glanced in the direction of his master. Still the indifference of a tall jade figure, still the cold air that was hard to approach, still that proud and elegant, so arrogant that it made people's hearts tremble, but the coldness in her eyes made Eunuch Sun shrink his neck. He turned his head to face Helian Jiawa and said, "Young Lady Jiawa, you can't speak carelessly. The He family's second young master has already descended the mountain. We personally stopped the carriage, but we didn't find young Lady Wei Wei. If your words were heard by others, it would become a big matter. It wouldn't be good if people misunderstood that you sisters don't get along well." With so many things happening today, Eunuch Sun was already trembling with fear. If it was any other time, he definitely wouldn't have said it so bluntly. After all, the other party was the young miss of the general's manor. The people of the four great clans were very protective of her. Even the retired emperor considered her as a candidate for the third imperial concubine. However, this Helian Jiawa was really too much. His Highness was already in a bad mood, but she still came over to add oil to the fire. Did she really think that others couldn't see through her tricks? They were just tricks that were used to fight in a large courtyard. In the eyes of these people who stayed in the palace all year round, it was as boring as a child playing house. Even an old eunuch like him didn't put her in his eyes, let alone his family's highness who had deep thoughts. He reckoned that his master just didn't want to talk nonsense with this Helian Jiawa. Eunuch Sun also didn't say anything more. With a flick of the horsetail whisk in his hand, he followed Beligaju and left. Probably because they were worried about the appearance of the Helian Jiawa, so none of them discovered that after they left, one of the bodyguards actually disappeared inexplicably. The Helian Jiawa who ate a soft nail from Eunuch Sun tightly clenched the handkerchief in her hand. Her eyes were filled with malice, but she had already achieved her goal. She didn't believe that the royal would remain indifferent after hearing her words just now. That cheap woman's good reputation would remain until today. Not returning home at night was a punishment in the White Academy. If that cheap woman still didn't appear at dawn tomorrow, it would confirm that there was something shameful between her and young Master He. She didn't care about what Eunuch Sun said just now. Even if that cheap woman was innocent, she still wanted to take this opportunity to once again ruin her reputation. The Helian Jiawa's eyes were filled with satisfaction. Just as she was about to leave, she discovered that the servant girl who held the lantern for her had her head down. She didn't know what she was doing, so she unhappily berated her, still not quickly bringing the lantern over. "You don't have the least bit of eyesight." "Yes." That servant girl respectfully walked over. She didn't know if it was because the sky was too dark, but she was really afraid that the Helian Jiawa would fall. From beginning to end, she kept her eyes down and obediently held the lantern. She didn't even lift her head. As for Bailey Jiaoju, who had just strolled into the superior compound, he seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, his pair of eyes tightened and his voice was extremely cold. "All of the imperial bodyguards, gather here and count the number of people." The shadows stared blankly. They didn't understand why their master would give such an order. After they truly gathered, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on their foreheads, reporting to Your Highness, "We're missing one. We're missing one." Belegaju sneered as he repeated these words. His voice penetrated with a bone-piercing iciness, making everyone shrink their necks. Especially the shadow who followed Belegaju all year round. What did it mean that the bodyguards were missing one person? It meant that it was very possible that Hellion Vivian had just disguised herself among them and listened to their plan right under their noses. And they didn't detect anything at all. Should he praise that eldest miss of the Hellion family for her top-notch disguise skills, or should he say that she wasn't afraid of death? This Hellion Vivian was the first person who dared to despise his master's imperial might. Good, truly good. Belegaju slowly pulled out a smile. That kind of Ivildor's iciness didn't reach the bottom of his eyes. Instead, it made people feel that their entire bodies were stiff. Even Eunuch Sun sensed the strangeness of this matter. How could there be one less bodyguard at this time? Oh my God, please don't be what he's thinking. How could this eldest miss of the Hellion family be so bold? She even dared to pretend to be one of His Highness' bodyguard. Belegaju's tightened hands slightly loosened. What followed was the swaying of the large tree behind him and the raging wind. His hair, which was as dark as night, fluttered in the wind like a snake slithering in the grass. That pair of phoenix eyes, which had always been covered by indifference, flickered with light. Leaves rustled and fell from the tree trunk. He tilted his head, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, that kind of bone-chilling voice sounded again. How many servant girls were following Hellion Jiawa just now? How many servant girls? Eunuch Sun stared blankly. This kind of thing generally wouldn't be noticed by anyone. Replying to Your Highness, 2. Shadow recalled for a moment and finally decisively replied with a number. Capture all of them. Bailey Jiaoju retracted his gaze from the imperial bodyguards. His tall and straight back was as straight as a pine tree in the Kang Mountains. His indifferent indifference made people feel no warmth. He walked to the center of the crowd. Everyone subconsciously held their breaths. Because they knew that this time, that Hellion Vivian really couldn't escape. Chapter 100. The superior compound was only that big, it was very easy to catch someone. What's more, the royal family found 2 servant girls. Apart from the Hellion Jiawa, who was somewhat surprised, the rest of the people were confused. Now, basically everyone in the superior compound was awake. Some young ladies from influential families, in order to be able to see Belegaju, also temporarily put on a cloak and let the servant girls hold an umbrella for them as they watched from the side. The Hellion Jiawa looked at her 2 servant girls, the light in her eyes full of deep meaning. At this time, why would the royal family suddenly want to see her servant girls? Could it be? The Hellion Jiawa's thoughts turned. She wanted to reach out and grab the 2 servant girls' hair, to take a good look at their appearance, second sister. Helplessly, this scene was interrupted by Hellion Mai, who came from the west. She walked over without a care, her voice carrying a sense of schadenfreude. What stupid thing did that slut do again, to make the royal family spend so much effort to catch her? The Hellion Jiawa looked at the surrounding royal guards who cast their gazes in their direction, wishing she could sew Hellion Mai's mouth shut. She didn't want to say anything more to Hellion Mai, so as to avoid her own taste also being dragged down. Why didn't she notice before? This younger sister of hers was so stupid. There were so many people present, yet she still brazenly called Hellion Vivian a slut. Was she afraid that others wouldn't know she didn't have a good upbringing? What these young ladies from influential families of the superior compound hated the most was people shouting loudly, and Hellion Mai had all of that. When they had just entered the school, she could tell everyone that this younger sister of hers was young and had a naive temperament. But after going through so many things, what the sisters needed the most was to re-establish their own network of contacts. Hellion Mai still didn't understand the situation. She was simply beyond saving. Wait until later, she had to properly talk to her father and think of a way to send her out of White Academy, so that she wouldn't make a fool of herself here. Hellion Mai was not an ignorant person. Now that she saw Helian Jiawa ignoring her, it was obvious that Helian Jiawa was giving her a cold shoulder. However, Helian Mai didn't dare to say anything. The smile on her face froze, and she was as embarrassed as she could be. The sound of footsteps could be heard from afar. The Helian Jiawa smiled shyly and looked in the direction of Beligaju. Beligaju didn't even look at the two sisters. His gaze fell on the two maidservants. His black eyes were distant and indifferent, and there was an irresistible sense of oppression in the calmness. The two maidservants lowered their heads. In fact, one of them was trembling very badly, as if she had done something wrong. Even her fingers were trembling. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. With a wave of his hand, the hair ornament on the maidservant's head fell to the ground. Looking at the person's appearance again, it was clear that she wasn't Helian Vivian, and she wasn't someone who often followed Helian Jiawa. "You, who are you?" The Helian Jiawa pointed at the strange girl who suddenly appeared. The girl stuttered and kowtowed. Your Highness, please spare me. Yes, someone just gave me money and asked me to change clothes with her. I changed. I don't know anything." Beligaju listened indifferently to the girl's words. His eyes flashed slightly. "What clothes were you wearing before?" A cyan cloth skirt." The girl smelled the man's sandalwood scent and her mind went blank. Beligaju didn't make a fuss this time. Instead, his lips slowly pulled out a light smile. She really knows how to buy people's hearts. "Money? Sure enough, it's a good thing. Your Highness, do you want this subordinate to go look for the girl wearing the cyan cloth skirt now?" Shadow took a step forward and also became nervous. Beligaju curved his thin lips and slowly straightened his body. Brushing off the non-existent dust on his clothes, he said, "No need. According to her way of doing things, she definitely won't leave any clues behind. If she leaves anything behind, it means she did it on purpose. Right now, she can wear any color of clothes, but she won't wear a cyan cloth skirt." Standing in the middle of the servants, Helian Vivian silently cursed in her heart. This third prince was so hard to deal with that it made her teeth hurt. Dear, is it really good to be so smart? Be careful that you won't be able to find a wife. That's right, Helian Vivian had already changed into a servant. She wouldn't wear the same set of clothes for more than half an hour. That way, it was very likely that she would give herself away. However, the problem now was that this was the last time she would change her clothes. The more people she made unconscious, the more flaws she would reveal. At that time, she would still fall into the third prince's evil clutches. No, she couldn't go on like this. She had to leave the hospital as soon as possible. However, it was definitely impossible for him to walk on land. Originally, she didn't want to make such a big commotion. But the third prince was chasing her so closely, she had no choice but to use her trump card. "Yuan Ming." Helian Vivian lowered her voice and said in a light tone, "Let Little White bring more spirit beasts over." Didn't the third prince want to compete with more people? Let's compete for him to see. Yuan Ming had never been as excited as he was today. As a demon that depended on his master, the stronger his master's desire to win, the more his blood boiled. However, "Woman, it's rare to see you so nervous." Helian Vivian chuckled, "You're not nervous? If you're not nervous, you can try fighting with the royal family. You'll be played to death in minutes." Yuan Ming admitted this point. After a few rounds, his brain was not enough. That man still had a look of absolute control over life and death, as if he had great power in his hands. He hadn't seen such a person for a long time. Except for that person from a long, long time ago. But it was impossible for that person to appear here. At this time, he shouldn't have woken up yet. Yuan Ming restrained his thoughts. His figure flashed and disappeared into the boundless night. In order to match her current identity, Helian Vivian also moved. Her fingers held the handle of the umbrella, holding it for a young master. She couldn't help but say that she was very lucky. If it wasn't for the rain, it would have been much easier for Beligaju to find her. But what she didn't expect was that Beligaju's next sentence was, "Put down all the umbrellas in your hands." What? Helian Vivian was secretly shocked, but she tried her best to calm herself down and maintain her previous posture. Following that, she heard Eunuch Sun's cry of alarm, "That won't do, Your Highness." The rain is too heavy. If you don't hold an umbrella, your body. Hellion Vivian stared blankly. In order to catch her, he actually didn't even hold up his own umbrella. Looks like the third prince is serious this time. Even the imperial bodyguards were cold and couldn't hold up their umbrellas. Hellion Vivian clenched her teeth. Wait until she escaped this calamity and came back from the armament conference. She definitely had to find a chance to properly ask the third prince. What kind of enmity did he have with her that was worth him spending so much effort? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.